Hello, MIFV Max, and later on, the kaiju lovers. It's me, Nate Marchand, the host and curator of the Monster Island Film Vault, and it's time for the midway point of Monarch Season 2. Yes, Jimmy, don't remind me. All right. So, hello, and as usual, this is going out to MIFV Max first as an exclusive. We're actually getting back on the weekly coverage train here, and we will be, and then later on, it will be part of a supercut for the kaiju lovers. All right, so we have episode 5. Like I said, we're just going to get right into it. It's called Furusato. And I looked up who our writers and directors are here, as I always do. So our director, is it right? Let me make sure this is director. Our director is Jeff F. King, more specifically. And our writer is Andrew Colville. Colville? We'll go with Colville. Both of these men are highly pedigreed, to say the least. So Jeff King, he's also a screenwriter, a comic writer, and a TV producer, and a film director, so he wears many hats. Previously worked on a show called Due South in the 90s, which I remember enjoying when I was younger. And then he worked on stuff like Easy Streets. He was a co-executive producer on Stargate SG-1. Shout out to Eric Anderson. And he also worked on stuff like Relic Hunter, Strange Days at Blake Halsey High, Mutant X, Dino Sapien. There's a title for you right there. White Collar, The Umbrella Academy, and The Acolyte, unfortunately. He also wrote the DC Comics event series Convergence, which I read a bunch of. So like I said, very well pedigreed, and Mr. Colville is also very pedigreed. He's worked on Mad Men. He won a Writers Guild of America award for it, worked on a short-lived series called Lone Star. He was in it. He worked on Nikita for the CW. Co-executive producer in the second season of Star Trek Discovery. How unfortunate for you, my dude. I'm sorry. But he's really well known because he's the executive writer and executive producer for Severance, which is probably why he's working on this. And let's see. Yeah, and he's also an executive producer on this. And it mentions that Monarch won a 2025 Saturn Award for Best Adventure Series. So both of these men very well decorated. And I can actually, looking at what they've worked on, I can see why they would want to work on a show such as this. All right. So I mentioned before that this episode is called Furusato. And I mentioned in the previous episode's coverage that this made me do a little bit of research, and I looked into this. So before we get into it, I'm going to bring it up because the episode explains it, but doesn't really explain it. I might have assumed a little too much on the audience's part, as we'll get into, but it is a children's song. It was composed in 1914 by a Japanese composer named Teiichi Okano. So let's see. His hometown was, okay. Let's see. What else did there's barely anything here about him. Just other stuff that he's composed. And I guess Furusato is the best known one. It says even though his hometown was Nagano, the lyrics don't seem to refer to a particular place. So going off of what Wikipedia says, let's see. Yeah. Instead, they describe a person who is working in a distant land, expressing his feelings of nostalgia for the hills and fields of his childhood home. And it says that the Japanese government made Furusato designated a Japanese children's song to be taught in Japanese public schools. And it was included in the popular song collection called Nihon no Hyakusen. And let's see, they didn't know that Mr. Okano wrote this until the 1970s. And then since 1992, his name and It said Tatsuyuki Takano have been printed with the song in Japanese music textbooks. It was used at the closing ceremony of the 1998 Nagano Olympics, and then again in 2014 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Furusato. It was performed by the Saito Kainen Festival Matsumoto in Nagano. And let's see what else. Yeah, that's it. Because the lyrics are, it is sung in Japanese in this a couple of times. So I won't read off the Japanese lyrics to you, but I will tell you what the translation is. This is the translation, not the verse translation. There's a verse translation as well that's written to rhyme. We'll go with the literal translation here. So the song goes like this. I chased after rabbits on that mountain. I fished, I should say, for a minnow in that river. I still dream of those days even now. Oh, how I miss my old country home. Second stanza. Father and mother, are they doing well? Is everything well with my old friends? When the rain falls, when the wind blows, I stop and recall of my old country home. Third stanza. Someday when I have done what I set out to do, I'll return home one of these days, where the mountains are green, my old country home, where the waters are clear, my old country home. And then there was an English version that was recorded by, it was translated, I should say, by Greg Irwin and published in the album Japan's Best Love Songs of the Season in 1998. And it was performed by Lexi Walker. And then has that listed out here. Oh, and on Wikipedia, this says there's a Furusato monument in Tottori Prefecture. So yeah, that's where it comes from. And does it factor into the story of the episode? It does. Not exactly how I thought it would, but it kind of does. We'll get into it. So it was at this point, and I feel like I need to issue a retraction. Yes, Jimmy, you spoke with me afterward about it, and after the last episode we did, and it made this abundantly clear to me. There, you got the credit. Are you happy? Sure. Fact checked. Right. Anyway, it occurred to me just before this episode got started that Kate does have a way she can help because she has the weird aquatic telepathic connection to Titan X. I can see how that could be useful. Anyway, we have a new flashback. We're jumping around with the flashbacks again. This was an interesting one, though. And one that really should have set up, well, maybe I should have saw how this episode ended coming with this. Who knows? But 1990 in Tokyo, and this is, we get right into it. We have Furusato, and Hiroshi is singing Furusato to little Kate to help her sleep back in America. There aren't any subtitles, so it doesn't translate the song. That's why I rattled off that translation for you. And Hiroshi mentions, and this is as close as you get to getting any sort of idea of what the song actually means. But he says that Hiroshi mentions that Keiko, his mother, sang it to him when she missed Japan. Okay. Then we find out that he's at a hospital, and Kentaro was just born, and his other wife wanted to name him after William Randa. But he said, no, let's use my biological father's name, Kentaro. So that's his grandfather's name, which is interesting, which means Keiko's husband, her first husband, who we found out was in Nagasaki and then basically we're told not in so many words, died of cancer because of the atomic bombing. His name was Kentaro. So now we have a name for him. I don't know if this is something that they've always known and they just now telling us, or if this was a decision that they made writing this season. But it's still interesting. And then we jump back to the quote-unquote present, 2017. And now Keiko and Hiroshi are having an argument in Japanese, their mother tongue. But there does come a point, and this is a trope you see a lot, where people speak a foreign language, it'll be subtitled, but then once it gets to a certain point in the conversation where it gets more important, or it gets really important, I should say, they switch to English. And we get a very brief cut back to the season 1 flashback in Kazakhstan. And Keiko tries to insist that what happened with her and Shaw was a one-time mistake, as she puts it. And Hiroshi blames her for this betrayal for why, not Lee leaving, but for Randa eventually leaving him. And we spend a lot of time in this episode getting into Hiroshi's abandonment issues, which does make sense. His mother disappeared, his quote-unquote uncle disappeared, and then his adoptive father, we'll say, in Bill Randa, got too caught up in his work and basically entrusted him to other people when he'd kind of latched onto him as his dad. Yeah, so it makes sense. And as we'll find out in some later scenes as we go through this, he's going to get called out on some things and confront some things. Because, well, boy, the ending. All right, and then after the credits, is it after the credits? I think it's after the credits, yeah. We have Lee and Hiroshi, so Shaw and Hiroshi, and he calls him out on the very things that I think we've been talking about, the audience is well aware of, the other characters are well aware of, and he tells him, he's like, you're too obsessed with changing the past and resenting your mother for for falling in love with two men, and he even says it should be something that's something he knows something about. Nice job, Shaw. Yeah, that's what a lot of us have been talking about. You're calling it out right there. You're basically speaking for the audience at this point. His mother made a one-time mistake, and you, because of your abandonment issues, ended up having two families. And what's your excuse? Well, I guess she was doing it better because, at least it was just one time with her. I'm still don't fully understand it. He calls her out about this too. It's just like, well, I thought, your heart belonged to Billy, but not really. So, everybody's getting called out in this episode. That's what this boils down to. Everybody's getting called out for making stupid decisions. Sure. Just like what you do with me. Don't keep reminding me. Dude, seriously. All right. I don't need this to turn into a therapy session. All right. Moving on. So the director of Monarch, he's talking with Tim, and they have this big argument about whether or not Apex can be trusted. And Tim is trying to tell him that they're up to no good. But how does he know that? It's like, well, I have a trusted source, but he won't really name it. It's like, it's Lee Shaw, isn't it? So they go back and forth. And then we find the director doesn't trust Apex either. But his hands are tied because Apex knows people and they have given them a ton of technology. So if he's going to do anything, he needs evidence. Well, there you go. So that becomes Tim's impetus for this episode. And then we have a scene that's on an aircraft, and Kate is trying to explain what I'm calling aquatic telepathy. And she says it was like the ocean was singing, and no one's really buying into it. They're kind of just disregarding her about it. She's like, okay, I guess it doesn't mean anything, so she just moves on. But I said saying that the ocean was singing is one way to put it. That still hasn't really been explained at this point. And I'm going to need an explanation soon, because otherwise this episode treats tight necks very naturalistically as opposed to this pseudo supernatural thing that seems to be going on here. So yeah, like I said, I need some explanations. I started thinking that maybe the whole idea of the ocean singing was going to be a connection to Fudor Sato, and I sort of was right. Maybe I was right. They're just not spelling it out all that clearly or all that much. Trusting the audience, maybe? That's how I'm going to go with it. So we find out that the Santa Soledad, which is where we were in those original flashbacks this season, is in Chile. It's part of Titan X's migration route. And the problem is, it wasn't supposed to be there until 2023, but they woke it up early. So I guess it can somehow get from Axis Mundi to there. That's a little confusing. They haven't quite explained what that means. But is Axis Mundi part of its migration, route? Why is it there? We still don't know why it's there. The Apex lady, Brenda, I think is her name. She name drops reproduction or food, but we still don't really know. And then we get to a scene with all the characters hiking through the area. It's filmed in California, and they're passing it off as Chile. I haven't been to Chile, so I don't know what it looks like, but I don't know if it looks like this. If we have any listeners in Chile or any listeners who've been to Chile, please let me know. But Kentaro, it only took him a while, but Kentaro finally gets a meaningful scene in this season where, as they're all wandering around, he has this talk with Kate. And he tells her that their dad was an engineer, and he had abandonment issues. That's why he had two families, because he wanted to make sure he never felt lonely. And he says that, hey, our dad always loved us both. And she says, yeah, and he left us too, which is a good point. And he brings up how, hey, when you were gone for 2 years and I told Dad that you were dead, or that I thought you were dead, he was devastated by it. So he's trying to put a good word in for their dad, which I think is admirable personally. And then there was another conversation with Keiko and Shaw where they were going over some of the stuff and how, we're going to have to resolve all of this. So it's basically we have two pairs of characters talking about Hiroshi and how they have stuff to deal with Hiroshi, but they're not sure it's the right time to do that yet, while he's hiking in between both of these pairs, and he may or may not be eavesdropping on any of these conversations. We don't know. And then we cut to, it's the village now from the 50s flashbacks. I'm going to be honest with you, that set looks better at night than it does in the daytime. Maybe it's the setting, but it's kind of belying the fact that it's may or may not, be passable as Chile. I'm just throwing that out there. And then Brenda is suspicious of Korra. And then we find out that even though Korra still kind of wants to help Shaw and all the rest of them, she's actually on board with what's going on here. And I thought at first she was working hard to hide it, but she says, yeah, he's like, that your friends are here, which is interesting that they're smart enough to know that. But she says, yeah, they've told me all of this stuff is stupid, but I also believe in it. And at first I thought it was part of her ruse, but then as time went on in the episode, we find out, no, she's now all in with this. And I can understand why. It's just like I said in the previous episode. Is Apex really the bad guys in this? This actually sounds like a good idea. And I failed to realize that there's one very big reason why this is potentially nefarious on their parts, as we'll get into here in a few minutes. So then we go back to Outpost 17, and I'm like, oh no, behold, the cabin where the quote-unquote controversial sex scene happened. So I guess this is part of, I guess you could say, the subtle hints at the song Furusato, because we have characters returning to places. We have quote-unquote Kokai, Titan X, returning to Chile, which seems to have some sort of significance there. So that's probably one of the more obvious ones there. We have these characters returning to a place where something significant happened. It's not their home, so to speak. Although, this cabin was the place where, if you want to, talk about it this way, where Shaw and Keiko quote unquote consummated their love the one time that they did. So I guess you could kind of call it home in that regard, maybe. And then we find out that Hiroshi, he has a conversation, a pretty meaningful conversation with his mother, where he says, "Yeah, when I read that letter, I was angry at first, but then I was relieved." Basically, it's because he found out it wasn't his fault, because he had blamed himself for years for why Randa left. He thought it was his fault. He found out, no, it wasn't his fault. Well, there you go. And then we had a flashback, and this was the flashback that I don't really understand why we needed to see this. I don't quite see the point of this one. But we flash back to 2014, and Hiroshi is about ready to go visit his family in America, but he gets a call from Tim. He says, "Oh, we found a bag that was from Randa's Skull Island expedition." So we're hinting at Kong Skull Island with that. And he said, like, "There's stuff in here, you need to see it." And Janjira gets mentioned, which tells me that this was just before G-Day, just before Godzilla 2014. And basically, he gets lured away to come look at this, as opposed to visiting his family. And I don't quite know why it's there, because it's not really giving us any new information. We basically do all of this stuff, so I'm not sure what to do with that, unless I missed something. And then it's mentioned the Titan X is 10 miles away from Chile. It swims under Outpost 18, scares everybody. And then I'm like, I would think it would get there faster than it does, because by the time it arrives, it's pitch dark. So it's either a lot slower than I thought, or that was more than 10 miles. But then again, I don't know how fast this thing can swim, but the impression I get is that it swims ridiculously fast. But maybe I misheard how far it actually was. And then this is when Korra is able to sneak away and talk to the rest of the characters. And she basically says, "Yeah, I'm all on board for this." She's a true believer now. Good for her, I guess. I don't know if she's quite drank the Kool-Aid, but she's at least on board with Apex for this. And then Kate calls out this whole thing, I should say, first. It's like, who gets to... It's like, okay, controlling the Titans is one thing, but who gets to do it? And I thought that's a really good point. That's how you can frame them as the bad guys. Because who's to say, just because you can't control the monsters, the question becomes, who should control the monsters? Apex? Monarch? Governments? There's a lot of questions asked about that. And I wrote this very Terror of Mechagodzilla. Because even though it's not necessarily outrightly stated in Terror of Mechagodzilla, I do think that the reason why Dr. Mifune was as reviled as he was because his colleagues decided that no one should have the power to control animals, let alone giant city-wrecking animals such as kaiju, such as Titanosaurus. And then the whole movie is about creating controls for them and then manipulating the monsters to do things they don't want to do. So I do feel like thematically anyway, we're getting into some very traditional Godzilla territory here. And then Shaw points out the obvious, because they're asking us like, well, if this is such a great idea, why would Apex keep it secret from Monarch and the rest of the world? And he says, so they can sell it to whoever they want as a weapon. Because that's exactly what this is. If you gain the ability to control these Titans, these creatures of mass destruction, you have a weapon on your hands. And a weapon that would be worth a ton of money. Because then governments can just send monsters to wreck cities, to wreck their enemies' cities. All right, congratulations. I feel like an idiot for not figuring this out sooner. But yeah, this is why it's a problem. The device itself isn't necessarily bad, but it can be used for ill intent. It's the whole Second Amendment thing. My first novel, Pandora's Box, touches on this, except in that case, it uses weapons of mass destruction, most notably nuclear weapons. Just because you give a gun to somebody doesn't mean that the gun itself is evil if that person goes and then uses it to, say, commit a murder. The act itself is evil. The person wielding the weapon is the one who is evil. It is merely a tool, and tools are neutral. So keep that in mind. I perhaps betrayed my politics a little bit, but it's just, for me, it is simple logic. The weapon itself is not evil. The wielder of the weapon is what is potentially evil. So this is a good idea that can easily be corrupted for nefarious purposes, including making some money and committing mass murder. Because, yeah, that's how this sort of stuff rolls. And then at this point, Titan X starts coming ashore, and Kate starts having her little connection. This time she doesn't need water to do it, so I don't know what's going on there. But she walks up to it and starts trying to maybe communicate with it or something like that. And I thought, is this going to be the more naturalistic counterpoint to the technology, that she has this bizarre bond with the creature? And, its horns are blue, so it's clearly not upset. It's not being aggressive. And then everyone sees this, and they freak out. And then they unleash this missile with the control device on it in order to get control of it. And my initial thought was not Titan X, but Apex would get control of it and would send it to go do stuff, and that would necessitate interference from Godzilla and Kong to fight it. That did not happen because Apex, despite Korra's warnings, went ahead way too fast, and the device couldn't handle a creature that size and basically overloaded. So it didn't work out, and it just made Titan X angry. Its horns turned red, and it went nuts, and it started wrecking the village. And honestly, it looks like a giant lizard, or like a Godzilla, but with tentacles, which it almost feels like a leftover Pacific Rim kaiju design, to be honest. I know, right? They may as well stop teasing us and actually make a crossover happen. It's still probably never going to happen, but I would love it if it did. All right. And then we get to the most surprising part of the episode, but I really should have seen it coming because it was clearly being set up. Because as of these conversations that he has in this episode, Hiroshi's story is basically done. He was the MacGuffin, so to speak, last season. The kids were trying to find him. He was running around doing stuff. And then here he basically has the resolution that he the resolutions for the most part that he needed to have with the other characters. But here he gets hit by some of the debris during the Titan X attack. And spoiler warning, he dies. Yeah, I was a little surprised that they killed him, but I really shouldn't have been, because there wasn't a whole lot to do with him after this point. And maybe the loss of him, hopefully, will be used to their narrative advantage going forward. And then the song comes back, because Keiko sings it for Hiroshi in these final moments, recalling how he said that his mother sang it to him. And then Kate is there, and then she joins in because Hiroshi sang it for her when she was a little girl to comfort her so she could go to sleep. So you have 3 generations of this family who are singing this sentimental Japanese children's song about longing for home. And I'm not going to lie, it was a very touching scene. In this case, it's not offering comfort for sleep, it's offering comfort in death. I even wonder, is it implicitly saying that home is the afterlife in this case? I don't know. But again, one of the best scenes of the season, I would say. Very effective one. Very effective one. And the gut punch, albeit a small one, because it's not really a cliffhanger, but it's the kind of the gut punch ending. Kentaro did run off to try to find someone to come treat Hiroshi's injuries. And Monarch did show up. Apex ended up having to evacuate, so we've got Apex people running all over the place at this point. And Tim and Monarch do show up, but they show up too late. And Kentaro returns too late. His father's already dead. And that's how the episode ended. Yeah. Definitely a big improvement over the previous episode, where not a lot of stuff was accomplished, which I think was by design. And the drama actually felt a bit more earned, less soap opera-ish, because we had characters, confronting things, talking to each other, trying to unravel some of this stuff. And then it ended on this very touching scene. So I was happy with this episode overall. And next week, the episode is called Requiem. And if I go just off of the quick description on Apple TV Plus, it looks like our boy Godzilla is finally going to show up. And I'm kind of excited about that. And I'm wondering what they're going to do with it. But that's a discussion for next week. Any final thoughts, Jimmy? Well, I'm glad you didn't take that job offer, given what happened with Apex later. Yep. But yeah, that is a good point. Sometimes working for the board of directors here on the islands, is a highly questionable career choice as well. Anyway, see you all next time. Hello, MIFV Max, and later on, the kaiju lovers. Nate here, continuing our weekly coverage of Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2. We're going to be talking about Episode 6, Requiem. Yes, Jimmy, I too had used this title, I should say, for one of the chapters in my first book, Pandora's Box. Well, it was actually for the quote-unquote part 2 of it, because I just learned that word when I was writing it, and I thought I sounded clever. Yes, perhaps it does make a little bit more sense here, but we will get into that. So, full disclosure, I actually am recording this early in the morning here at the studio, putting in a little bit more overtime again. And I watched it last night. I was going to record last night, but in a rare instance of fatigue, I guess you could say, not fatigue, tiredness. We'll go with that. I just didn't have the energy to do it. I want to make sure I gave my best for you guys. So I decided to get a rare session of sleep in before I started recording. Yes, even my boundless energy has limits. I've been a little busy, okay? A little busier than normal. I trend toward workaholism. Okay? Yeah. Just, What do you mean you don't see me around quite as much as you used to? You're too busy with the wife. Anyway, we'll just leave it at that and move on. What? It's not. You think I got a secret identity or something like that? Hey, what? You've considered that? That's nuts, and you know it. Anyway, secret identity. I don't wear eyeglasses, man. Okay, you don't have anything to worry about. All right, so let's get into this. So, first thing I'm going to remark, if you came to this episode excited that you were going to see Godzilla, you might have been disappointed. Because Godzilla is in the episode for about 30 seconds. And Kong was at the beginning and was in it much longer than that. Like, this is kind of Kong's season. He's been in it a lot. So I haven't checked to see any online response to this, but I have a sneaking suspicion people are going to be like, yeah, I didn't get to see Godzilla hardly at all. And spoiler warning, what little bit you do see him is a dream. So it's not even real. Yeah. Also, there are some weird lore things going on here with Godzilla, and I'm not sure what exactly is happening, but we'll get into that. The other thing I'm going to point out is the flashbacks are officially all over the place now. It's a little ridiculous. Now, they make sense from a narrative standpoint, but they are completely scattershot in this episode. Because it's jumping around all over the place. Like, well, let me see. Because we had Skull Island 2 weeks ago. Then we had and then it's mostly 1950. Okay, it's a little less scattered than I thought, but it goes back to 1958. And those flashbacks, if you're taking Monarch as a whole, the 1958 flashbacks take place between some of the flashbacks in, not only between the flashbacks that we saw in the first couple episodes of this season, but it takes place in between flashbacks that we had in season 1. Because as I'll get into, it sets up stuff that we see later on in season 1. So the question becomes, are we dealing with retcons? I'm starting to think we are. Are these examples of bad retcons? I don't think so. In fact, the very fact that Godzilla appears in this and it's a dream sequence, given what happens in the dream sequence, actually follows what's been established in the movies, because in King of the Monsters 2019, they said Godzilla hadn't really been seen for 5 years. So there's that. It's still making it a dream, still a little bit of a cheat, but at least it's not, we're kind of getting your cake and eating it too, as we'll get into that. But on the other hand, like I said, there's some weirdness done with Godzilla in this. But anyway, so we start Skull Island 2 weeks ago, which allows us to get a little bit more Hiroshi, despite the fact that he's kind of dead. And by kinda, I mean very. And we also find out that Kentaro is an artist, because he's wandering around the jungles of Skull Island, comes across Kong, starts drawing him, and then Kong, being kind of a jerk because he's grumpy, is just like brrr, and it scares him away. But you get a lot of Kong in this, and this feels more like Skull Island Kong here than I'm talking about, like the Skull Island movie from 2017. It feels more Skull Island Kong than it does the GVK and GXK Kong. I don't even think he had the beard yet, so that's another thing. So the model's much closer to that, which I guess means Kong grew the beard pretty fast. Just saying. And so it's a nice start. And the other thing that I appreciate about this episode is we actually get some meaningful stuff with Kentaro. Like, this is largely a Kentaro episode. And it's about dang time, because he's been involved, done a cool thing or two, but he's mostly been in the background this season, and the show remembered he exists, which is good. Probably should have done it a little bit more, but I'm happy with what we're getting here. And then Kentaro goes back to, it's the Apex base, and it comes to an electrical fence, and it looks like the electrical fence from our competition, Jurassic Park. But funny enough, he manages to just use a stick to make an opening wide enough that he can slip through it, although he freaks out a little bit because he gets dangerously close to getting electrocuted. I mean, I know, go talk to the kid who got the brunt of it in Jurassic Park. I still don't know how that place is still open. whatever on that. And then we have Hiroshi, and I joked in my notes, it's like they must have owed the actor money. And, they have a conversation in Japanese. They have a nice character moment. I was surprised that there was no subtitle for kanpai. I usually see it gets subtitled as something like cheers, probably more of a transliteration than anything. I don't know why they made that decision when I usually see it get subtitled. And it's one of the few bits of Japanese that doesn't get subtitled in the show, which once again, I want to say I applaud the show for having the boldness and the trust in the audience to let entire scenes go by with characters speaking a foreign language and they make it subtitled, because it makes sense that the characters would be speaking in that language, their native language, or well, maybe not native language, but speaking that language and not in English. And while they have this conversation, they go back and forth, they share a beer together and all of that. It's a nice little father-son moment. And Hiroshi reveals something. This is the first of what feels like retcons in this episode. He says that he lost a year because of the time displacement in Axis Mundi when he went from Alaska to Africa. He said he lost a year. Okay. And Kataru even asked him, "It's like, why didn't you mention this before?" And because I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, did they ever talk about this? I mean, I haven't rewatched season 1, so I don't remember. I don't know if they brought it up or not. Maybe they just didn't say it, and now he's bringing it up now, and it's being established. It's being established after he's dead, but okay. But the scene ends with a nice sentiment of Hiroshi saying, "Thanks to you, I got that year back." Okay, cool. And then we cut to a very traditional looking Japanese funeral. I've known a thing or two about Japanese funerals, and in other media, I've kind of gotten glimpses of it. Sorry, I bumped the table for my mic. We'll do it live. And did it again. We'll do it live. And it was interesting seeing kind of a more full-fledged one. So it was a nice cross-cultural experience. I have to say, even after all my time here on the island, have not attended a Japanese funeral, have had no need to do it. But this is when I said this is what fits the title, even though the word requiem is actually Latin and is more associated with the Catholic Church, particularly when I think it's specifically a funeral dirge. I could be wrong on that. Might want to double check me on that, Jimmy, if you want. But I'm pretty sure it's about it's about funeral dirges. You know what? I'm going to save you the trouble, and I'm just going to look it up myself. Let me see. I type in Requiem, and the first thing I get is Resident Evil Requiem. Well, that's just hilarious. Such is the time. I'm dating this episode hard. Yeah, mass for a deceased person, musical composition for such a mass, a hymn composition, or a service for the dead. So there you go. So I was right. All right, and then after we go through all of this, and I'm assuming though that is Hiroshi's ashes being added to what looks like a family grave, very Japanese. Suzuki, the scientist from the flashbacks to the 50s in season 1, he's still alive. And he looks like a Shiro Honda. I'm not kidding you. Dude seriously looks like he could play a Shiro Honda in a movie. And I'm wondering, you know what? I did not do my due diligence and tell you who our director and screenwriter were for this episode. My apologies. Our director is once again Mr. Jeff F. King. Talked about him last week. And our screenwriter is Maria Melnick. Admittedly, I can't find a whole lot of information about her. I've tried. It does. Maybe it's because I spelled her name wrong. Let's see. Let's try that. Oh, the WGA directory. Fancy. Let's see. Well, that doesn't. Yeah, it kind of helps. So, like, not a whole lot here. I don't have tons of information on her, but she's worked on Monarch. She's worked on Alien Earth, something called Counterpart. Let's see, American Gods, and Black Sails. Not necessarily all as writers, but she's worked on all of those. According to her IMDb, however, she did write on, she wrote on Escape Room, which I believe is a movie. Yeah. Another escape room movie called Tournament of Champions, American Gods as a writer, and Alien Earth. Make of that what you will. So there you go. Did your job for you, Jimmy. You've trained me well. Sure. Sure, dude. Sure. I get enough training as it is from other people. Oh, nothing. Nothing. Anyway. So, Suzuki's back. And he should be a Ishiro Honda as far as I care. Oh, now I remember what I was trying to check. I was trying to check to see if this is the same actor. Let me see. Dr. Suzuki. I think it's the same actor, but yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yep, it's only has Wikizilla only has one actor listed, Leo Ashizawa. So I'm assuming it's him in a lot of age makeup. My goodness, a lot of age makeup. But nice work, guys. Nice work. I'm impressed. Seriously, this guy, make an Ishiro Honda biopic and put this guy in it. Seriously, I want him to be Ishiro Honda now. That would be amazing. Please. This character's appearance in his old age, he looks so much like Ishiro Honda. I can't get over it. All right. So anyway, he shows back up, meets everybody. He's like, oh my gosh, you're all still alive and you all look so young. Oh, it's the same kind of song and dance that we've seen before. And the scene ends with old Shaw. It's a nice callback where he leaves the pocket knife that he gave Hiroshi when he was a kid. He leaves it on the gravestone and says to take care of it, and he'll make things right because he's Kurt Russell. He's Snake Plissken, dang it. And that's what he's going to do. All right, and then we got our first flashback to 1958 because, like I said, jumping all over the place. All right. And we see, cut back to one of those, again, kind of early days of Monarch when it was just in one office. And we have Keiko and Billy. And then Young Shaw comes in there a little bit later. And it turns out this feels a bit like a retcon, but they said that Keiko's photos of Titan X are what got them their outposts all over the place. Like, okay, this is seriously filling in a lot of gaps with, this is important information, important lore building that we didn't know before. Okay. And I started noticing, I think I've noticed this before, but it really stood out in this. Billy is using a lot of 50s style euphemisms throughout this, while the other characters just use normal profanities. And I don't really remember why that is. I don't know if it's an actor choice or if it's a character thing. Because, if you watch Kong Skull Island, the John Goodman version of Randa definitely doesn't do that. All right. And then I thought at first this was another retcon. I was in retcon mode for this entire episode, where Shaw comes in with champagne. They do a little toast, and he's like, and then Billy's like, I feel like I'm getting broken up with. And he says that he's getting himself reassigned. And it's the real reason is because he doesn't want to be around him anymore because of everything that happened with Keiko. So this is fallout from that, but, trying to keep secrets and all that fun stuff. And that becomes the crux of Young Shaw's story in this episode. And then, we have Korra shows up and goes out and talks Kentaro into going out for the night to a bar where they used to hang out. Cool. And then we cut back to 1958 because it's all over the place. And Shaw goes to meet his dad, who's also in the military, and he talks him into having a drink, even though he says, like, no, I don't want to drink because I got to be in tip-top shape before, when I go to my new assignment tomorrow with the general and all of that. But Dad talks him into having at least one drink. Well, spoiler warning, it ends up not being just one drink, as you would expect. And he just, Dad just calls it. I was like, what do you want to get reassigned? Did you get into a fight or fornicate? And like, very much like a dad to just cut to the chase. Very much. Very, very much. Just like a dad. And during this conversation, young Shaw uses the term "eat my hat." And I'm like, well, that's something I haven't heard in a while. And, so they have this whole back and forth about what this is going to mean for Shaw and his career. And his dad mentions that America tricks people into thinking they can have it all, but he tells them that honor is to be pursued at all costs, which seems like a very 1950s military dad kind of a sentiment. Makes sense to me. And we cut back to, again, for about 5 seconds, to the quote-unquote present. And there's a dinner between Kate, Keiko, Suzuki, and Shaw. That gets a little bit of development, gets some kind of Akio Josoji-like shots. There's a couple of them like that, where we have the camera at the bottom of something that gets filled with liquid, and it's looking up at characters. So in this case, it was supposed to be like an alcohol bottle. So they're having this conversation. They do the kanpai thing again, and this sounds like there's some weird ADR here, because I think it's supposed to be Kate, but her voice sounds way too high pitched to be her. Almost sounded like a child, or like that thing that Japanese women apparently do, where they make themselves sound more high pitched when they're out in public, because that's considered to be more appealing and attractive, but they're putting it on because their voices are slightly deeper than that. It's a very unfortunate cultural trend over in Japan. It's, a little disappointing, but, it happens a little bit here in Ogasawara as well. But anyway, I don't remember exactly, what important things were discussed in there, other than, just kind of continuing some of the plot developments that we've already seen. It's just that the high-pitched noise from Kate just stood out to me. And we go back to 1958, because good Lord. Except this time it's really short. And, this is when I also noticed that we're using booze bottles to transition, because we'll see it in one scene and then we'll cut to the flashback or vice versa. And that's, how we're doing it. And it's Lee showing up for work after having a little too much to drink. And then his dad shows up and is like, we're going to go get flapjacks. And that's an order. If you don't come with me, you'll get court-martialed. And he's like, crap. This should have been a sign that dad is got his own machinations going on here. Sure, that happened to you once or twice in the Air Force. Yeah. Did you get the same flapjacks? And they were delicious. All right. Good to know. Wish we had a flapjack place here. Well, I guess there is the Craterite Cafe. Maybe I should go visit it sometime. I hear the food is good. Anyway, so then we cut back, and it's it's called the Sota. I think I saw it in Wikizilla's article on this. Is it the Sota or is it the Sorta? Let me see. The Soda Bar. Sota. Sota. Yeah. Because it's not the same place that, it's under new management now than when him and Cora had been there before, and he goes over and orders a blue raspberry whiskey, so they can just sit there and have a conversation. And then we cut back to old Shaw and Suzuki. He calls him Zook, because one of the things I've noticed about Shaw is he's very fond of giving people little diminutive nicknames. Keiko is K, Suzuki is Zook, stuff like that. And we find out that they want to use this device that Suzuki has, because he still has it, that that we saw in the flashbacks in season 1. And he wants to use it to, just take some readings. But what he really wants to do is to open a portal to access money. And this is when we start getting a little bit confusing for me personally, because Okay, first off, old Shaw, because he's Kurt Russell, is just like, I'm going to summon Godzilla to kill Titan X to avenge Hiroshi. Because Suzuki's like, you can't kill a Titan. He's like, yeah, but I know somebody who can. And he's Godzilla. I'm like, well, that's ambitious, but he's Kurt Russell. What do you expect? But here's where we start getting weird. They're talking as if Godzilla is still in Axis Mundi and has been for a while. And if that's the case, Godzilla's been there for a while. For a long while. Well, maybe not very long at all, actually, because, time passes, quote unquote, more slowly at Axis Mundi, but it's still just a little bit strange. You're telling me he's been stuck there since season 1 this whole time? That's what was going on with Godzilla in the intervening 5 years between the movies? Okay. Seems like a lot was happening there. Just saying. And Suzuki says he's going to basically figure out how exactly the time works with, the time displacement. And he said, he says it's not where, but when. So are you going to actually give us the formula for how much time it passes? And it's because it's not just random. Because if that's the case, it seems like it's been a little inconsistent. Just saying, especially earlier in the season. And then we go back to Korra, and again, I'm still going to call her Korra, and Kentaro at the Sota bar. And at this point, Kentaro's had a little too much to drink. He's a kind of drunk, and they're having a conversation. And the way Korra's talking to him, I'm pretty sure she has a crush on him, which would be interesting. But then we have this little turning point that happens here where Kentaro kind of says what I've heard several people talking about in the fandom. So he kisses her, and she does back off out of shock. And his response is, oh, you must be gay for my sister. Not in those words, but you get what I mean. And she just walks away in frustration, not really saying one way or the other. But here we are. Apparently, it's like that old saying, and you would know all about this, Jimmy. A drunk man's words are a sober man's thoughts. Hey, calm down. We all know it's true, all right? It's, it's an unfortunate fact of reality. So, and he's grieving, which doesn't help. Because one of the things they've been bringing up is that if several people, including Kate, have been like, I'm so sorry you weren't there to say goodbye to Dad. And so he's been upset, understandably so. And, so this happens, but we still don't really have any confirmation. But Kentaro is still saying the quiet part out loud that a lot of the people in the fandom have been wondering, which is that Korra must also be a lesbian. And she must like Kate. I've even met a coworker who's like, I'm waiting for them to get together. And it's really bizarre. Okay, not bizarre, but it's interesting that this is all happening. But we still don't know one way or the other. And I'm hoping that gets revealed later. And then another girl walks up. And I just wrote my notes, who is this girl? Because they're treating her like she's important, not just some rando who's trying to swoop in and take advantage of the situation. And boy, howdy. When we find out who she is, I had to double check. I was like, wait, is this the same character? We'll get to it. And then we cut to another character moment between Kate and Keiko, where they're hanging out on a pier. Kate takes her shoes off, dangles her feet over into the water. And then their character moment is interrupted by the fact that they notice that there are ripples going toward her feet, as opposed to away from it. And they're big ripples. And so now they're like, Keiko's like, I got to figure out what's going on here. And then Kate finally comes out and just explains what's going on. And her mother, her grandmother, is more like, why didn't you say anything? So, because I thought it was crazy, whatever. And, so we're cutting back and forth between Suzuki and Old Shaw and the other characters all doing their thing. And then we'll go back to Kentaro here. And then this girl just grabs his phone, and I don't know how the phone was on. She must have got it while the phone was unlocked, because otherwise, how does she know what his passcode was or anything? Or maybe Kentaro's an idiot and doesn't have his phone locked or the password or a passcode. And she just puts her number in there. And I'm like, well, I wish it was that easy, just asking. But it's very forward. Like, she's just doing it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I would appreciate some woman that walked up to me randomly and just put her number into my phone. I think I'd be a little annoyed with that because just way too forward. But there's a reason why she's being forward. She's Walter Simmons' daughter. I know. I'm just as surprised as you are. Now, there was a daughter in Godzilla vs. Kong, so I jumped and checked, and I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. Was there another one? Was this the same one? And I checked it. It is not the same daughter from GVK. That was Maya Simmons. This is Isabel. So it's Maya's sister. And she certainly seems nicer than her sister. That's for sure. But now I'm sitting here wondering, so where was this daughter by the time we get to to GVK? Is she going to survive this season? Are you going to, because if she doesn't, you're going to tell me that Walter Simmons, lost 2 daughters to monsters? I'm surprised nobody mentioned that there was a sister at GVK. So again, we're continuing the retcon train here. I'm just saying, like, this is it was just okay. Okay, she's still carrying out things for Apex and her father, but she doesn't seem to be nearly as mean as her sister was. Okay, and we go back to 1958, MAG Vietnam, which they thankfully mention is supposed to be military advisement, because that's what this is this is at the Flapjack restaurant where this is between old young Shaw and his dad, and he says, like, I'm doing what needs to be done. I'm sending you where you need to go. He's basically just trying to run his life, and Shaw is not having a good time about that. And it's all because he thinks what Monarch is doing is silly, and that these monsters, these titans, and he gets heated enough that he gets the attention of the entire restaurant, and he basically tells his son, hey, in the end, this is the line that ends the scene. In the end, the only one thing matters: who wins, which is, so we can't coexist with the monsters. We have to destroy them. So he's basically in complete disagreement with what Monarch stands for, and that's why he wants him moved someplace where he can get some combat experience and move his career forward, unlike what he was able to do, because he's like, I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. Okay. But Shaw, again, not having a good time with that. So now he probably just feels like he's caught between a rock and a hard place. Then we go back to the present, and now subtly, and this is just weird, Suzuki has this weird line where they're driving to their destination. It's supposed, okay, this is for sure a retcon according to Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, Wikizilla, which is, it's Shaw keeps saying that he came out of the rift at Mount Osore in 1982, but the episode where that happened in season 1 said it was Mount this is one heck of a name. Higanazumo, which is 600 miles away. I don't know if that was intentional or if it was an oversight. Bad move either way. I think but that's a genuine retcon there. So it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. But he asked this question, it's like, what if Godzilla emerges? Like, I thought that was the goal. I thought that was the goal this entire time. And then we get to the moment where you've got Kentaro and Korra walking around Tokyo. And then we hear a very familiar cue, sound or music. I think it's sound cue from Godzilla 2014. And I'm like, oh no, he's coming. How did he get here? I thought he was in Axis Mundi. It was a little confusing. In true Godzilla fashion, there is a flying train. And then Godzilla appears, and the entire scene is giving me Heisei Gamera, particularly Gamera 3 vibes. where he's stomping through the city, not really caring about collateral damage. And, with the way the scene is set up with the lighting, because it's at night, the neon, like it is very Gamera 3. And we do see Kate appear, and she's like, he's not trying to hurt us. And I'm like, well, he's got a funny way of showing it. Again, kind of giving me some Gamera 3 vibes, which people have said for a while that they think the MonsterVerse took a lot from Heisei Gamera, and I tend to agree with them. And then when we even get a glimpse of Titan X, so there's a fight between Godzilla and Titan X in Tokyo. So this marks the first time Godzilla has been in season 2, and also the first time that Godzilla has been to Tokyo in the MonsterVerse, but none of it's real. It's a dream. It's a nightmare. I should have figured, because there were some things that just weren't adding up. And it makes some narrative sense that this is a nightmare that Kentaro is having. And that, like I said, it makes some narrative sense given everything that's been going on, but it also feels like a little bit of a cheat. Like they did this to get people to watch it. I don't want to call it a bait and switch, but it still feels a little bit like a bait and switch, maybe. It's definitely a have their cake and eat it too kind of a moment. So, yeah. Now, I know from the trailers, we are going to get some more Godzilla later in the season. But this has to be one of the shortest appearances Godzilla has ever made in anything. Because this scene barely exists. So, yeah. I'm not exactly sure. I was hoping Godzilla would come back in the end of the episode. I was thinking the episode would actually end with him re-emerging from Exodus Mundi. Spoiler warning, no. It's a little weirder than that, if I understand the end of the episode correctly. So then we come back to 1958, and young Shaw takes all of his rage out on a lamp. What did that lamp ever do to you, Shaw? I'm just saying. That poor lamp. And then we cut back, and we have Keiko and Kate trying to experiment to see what's going on with this signal, see if we can get any sort of idea what it is. We have this Jisoji-like episode where the camera's underwater looking up at Kate. So, again, a little bit of a visual theme that we have going on there. Nice job, Mr. Jeff King. But, and then Keiko says that you basically have to go full immersion with this. Ooh, baptism. Hardly. But, because just putting her feet in the water is not going to do it. So she just dives right in. And I was like, there's no way. I mean, I get it. This is a lake in Japan, so maybe it's different. But I'm like, this water is remarkably clear, for being some lake out in the middle of nowhere. But, like I said, maybe lakes in Japan are different. Never gone swimming in a Japanese lake before. So and then what's funny is, I wonder if it's just because this is just the tech that was available, or maybe it's Keiko being a little old fashioned, but she's recording everything on a cassette tape. Maybe, I thought it was amusing. So anyway, so we go through this whole scene where she's underwater. They get the signal. We hear the sound effect. And then Kate comes up, and Keiko plays it back. And Keiko's like, "Do you hear that?" He said, "That's panic. That's fear. I think it's lost." Okay. So are you telling me that Titan X is not a malevolent creature? That it's doing all of what it's doing out of fear? It's afraid of something? What's it afraid of? I'm a little confused there, as I don't know what it would be afraid of. Yeah. Also, if Godzilla is still in Axis Mundi, why have people been acting like he's around and he's just going to show up and kick Titan X's tail? Just saying. Like I said, this episode is like the king of retcons. All right. So then we go back to what basically becomes the last scene of the episode, where we have Suzuki and Shaw trying to do stuff with the portal, and Suzuki tells him, it's like, "Oh, you got to get really close to get me the readings that I need." It's like, okay, you have to be the conduit. He's not necessarily excited by that. And then in our last flashback of the episode, Shaw goes back to Monarch, so I guess that one isn't a retcon. And, it has something of a reconciliation with Keiko, trying to lay everything to rest. And the scene ends with her talking about how they need to go to Kazakhstan. So it's Kazakhstan. So they're setting up one of the flashbacks from season 1. Okay, cool, I guess. Resolution, maybe? I don't know. And then we get this kind of confusing ending to this episode where it looks like the portal in this chasm within this mountain does open up. We see light. We see Shaw. It looks like he's trying to touch it. And he's like, do you see that? Do you see that? And we hear some noises like there is a monster. And I was waiting for Godzilla to just poke his head out from the hole. And that would be the cliffhanger. But that doesn't happen. So it seems like something came through. Shaw was even acting like something came through. But it wasn't, it wasn't something physical. Instead, they start getting a radio signal. And I played it back a couple of times to make sure I understood what was going on. And near as I can tell, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like they made radio contact somehow with young Shaw in Axis Mundi, which immediately led me to wonder, are we going to do the gimmicky thing and have Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell meet on screen playing the same character? I don't know. So is this a good ending or not? I suppose it's a good ending because this cliffhanger is confusing and I don't understand what exactly is going on. I'll certainly take it over the emotional cliffhangers that we've gotten the last couple of episodes. But as for this episode as a whole, is it good? I would say it's probably a step up from some of the other episodes this season. But with all the retcons and the kind of a little bit of the bait and switch that happened in this episode with Godzilla, I don't know. I want to say that brings it down, but as the Omniviewer pointed out in one of his review videos for one of the previous episodes, I think it was the episode from 2 weeks ago, this show is operating like a streaming series where it's serialized, but we're still getting it week to week. So everything just feels like a chapter as opposed to a nice self-contained story within, which has both ups and downs to it, advantages and disadvantages. So I don't know. I want to say that it wasn't as good as I was kind of hoping it would be, but it's one of those things where it's like, do you evaluate this as a whole or as an individual piece? I don't know. So I may have to hold off on any sort of final judgment until we finish things up. But, let's keep looking forward here. We're past the halfway point. Not quite to the home stretch, but we're inching up to it. Next week, episode 7 is called String Theory. Judging by the synopsis, I can't tell if we're going to get all that much in terms of monsters. I do know, like I said, if the trailer is not lying to us, Godzilla is going to show up again later. But I have a feeling the finale is going to happen on Skull Island because I need to see Kong sucker punch Tight Necks in the face. I'm just saying. If that's not in the show, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Regardless, thanks for tuning in and hearing me, rant, ramble, rave, whatever about about this episode. Thank you for your support once again, MIFV Max, and thank you, kaiju lovers, for giving this a listen after the fact. And please, if you're able, join MIFV Max on Patreon for as little as $3 a month so you can get early access to stuff like this and some exclusive content such as a monthly mostly Patreon exclusive podcast called MIFE Max, as well as behind the scenes blogs and scripts and all that, blooper audio, all that kind of fun stuff. All right. See you next week. Hello, kaiju lovers, and well, that later on it's the kaiju lovers. Now it's MIFV Max. So yes, my apologies, Patreon. I meant to have this ready for you sooner. I did watch the episode on Friday night, but I was once again a little tired after I saw it, and then got crazy busy over the weekend. But I'm remedying that. Hopefully, I will remember details well enough, even though it's been a couple of days since I watched the episode. You don't need to yell at me, Jimmy, about my timing. All right, so let's get into this. So first off, my initial thoughts on this. This was an unusual episode for this show because the flashback and the present day stuff run parallel. And it was very talky. So to, steal a little bit of a joke from a friend of the podcast, Ryan the Omniviewer Collins, we had a lot of wibbly wobbly timey wimey and a lot of wibbly wobbly talky walkie because good grief. If you like dialogue, you would love this episode. If you're hoping for more kaiju action, you might be a little disappointed. So let's get into this. Interestingly, my first note on here is Godzilla isn't even in the recap when it was going over the previous episode. That should tell you something because Godzilla is basically not. It was almost non-existent in the episode and kind of was non-existent because it was only a dream. So then it says 1962 Axis Mundi, and we go back to when Young Shaw first arrives there. We see stuff about Operation Hourglass and Mission Day Foxtrot, Day 6. And I wasn't expecting us to go back to Axis Mundi. That was another note I made. And I joked that Axis Mundi, and I think I said this before, wouldn't surprise me, as I haven't re-listened to my episodes on the previous season, but I joked that Axis Mundi is low-rent TV Hollow Earth, which is definitely the case. And there was this really weird scene that they never follow up on where Young Shaw finds his own corpse in the ground, and then it disappears. And we never do anything with that afterward. That was a little strange. Not sure what to do with that. And then I wrote, is this going to be a time loop? And and then we find out in this episode, because we hear his full name and we find out that Shaw is a third, as in he's the third guy in a row in his family to have this name. I didn't know that. And remember how I said that, and I think Ryan Collins brought this up as well. Remember how I said that this might end up being the movie Frequency? I don't know if anyone here besides me and Ryan remembers this movie. It's an interesting little movie that, who's in it? I'm going to have to look this up. So, because we have two famous people in that one. Because one of them was Jesus in The Passion. I'm trying to remember. I'm going to vamp while the Google loads. Why isn't it working? Why is it not working? All right, well, while it's fighting with that, let's go over our writer and director for this. So our director, actually, this is a name I do not know. This will be interesting. Okay, yeah, here we go. Oh yeah, Frequency. It's from 2000. And it stars Dennis Quaid, and Jim Caviezel. That's who it is. Yeah, and the premise is wonderfully simple. It's a young man, Jim Caviezel, who has a ham radio that allows him to talk with his dad in the past. And if I remember right, his dad had died. So it's an interesting little thing. They just they reconnect over this ham radio because the dad has a ham radio in the past, and this fluke of time travel allows them to talk to each other. We basically have the same thing here, except it's Shaw talking to himself. Although, interestingly, it's Kurt Russell talking to Wyatt Russell, his son. So metatextually, it's Frequency. If you haven't seen Frequency, I highly recommend it. Go watch it. So our director is Gondja Montero. I hope I said that correctly. I'm not sure. Oh, she has a website. So what else has she done? She's also worked on Wednesday for Netflix, Agatha All Along, and The Witcher on Netflix. Also worked on Paradise City for Hulu. Let's see, Sadikov. Let's look at her IMDb. I think this is the first time we've talked about her. I don't think we've seen her before. Yeah, Wednesday. Brand new cherry flavor, whatever that is. Wednesday. Control Options Escape. That's a short film. The Chai, I guess. Yeah. Monarch. Yeah, she's done one up. This is the first time we've talked about her. She's also worked on Pluribus. Yeah, so she has a pedigree, but this is her first time working on this. But she has worked on stuff that would put her in line. The words of The Walking Dead, Dead City. Yeah, so she's got some genre experience here, which is nice. And then our writer is Joe Pekaski, and I think this is the first time we've talked with him. He's also worked on Marvel's Cloak and Dagger, Underground, which is, let's see, it's a premiered on WGN America, huh? Yeah, American period drama. Okay, I don't know that one. And then the superhero series Heroes, and it says he's worked on a bunch of comics for Marvel Comics. There you go. Crossing Jordan, Daredevil. Netflix Daredevil, well, Disney Daredevil now, but it was the Netflix version originally. Oh, he was the showrunner for Cloak and Dagger and for Underground. Okay. I stand corrected. Yep, and he was the story editor on Heroes for a few episodes. All right. So there you go. He, too, has plenty of genre experience. All right. So, all of that to say, at this point, the flashback and the present are in tandem. And time travel shenanigans, to a certain extent, really start kicking in. Yes, Jimmy, I know you hate time travel. Yes, I know. This episode gave you a headache. And a bit of PTSD. Okay. Your convoluted backstory continues to baffle me. Anyway. Here's the thing, though. This plays fast and loose with the entire concept of what Axis Mundi can do. Even I noticed that. Well, I shouldn't say that. Even though I've normally been a little willing to let it slide, I noticed that. And they just hand waved it away, much like Doctor Who would do. And you just have Suzuki say, time is relative. And I wrote my notes. In other words, this whole thing operates on emotional logic. Drama logic, I guess you could say. And Suzuki even says, talk to you, as in talk to yourself. Yeah. So, because we want to, and I appreciate the fact that we didn't go ultra gimmicky with this and have Wyatt and Kurt in the same scene together. That might have been a little much, but we do get to have them talk to each other. And that's interesting because of how this whole thing is set up. A little bit of a gimmick, but at least it has some narrative justification. And then we cut to another scene where we have Kate and Keiko talking, and they bring up yokai, which is interesting. And it's at this point that you can tell that this is written by an American who doesn't fully understand what a yokai is, but it's hard to explain to an American audience what a yokai is. So the way it gets explained here is a little bit reductionist. Well, maybe more than a little reductionist. I don't know, but she calls a yokai a demon. It's an oversimplification. In the context that they're talking about with these other women in Japan who, supposedly were communing with a yokai and they went insane. And she thinks that, because they went down into a well, and she thinks that this may have something that may be similar to what Kate's been dealing with Titan X. So they decide to go to Japan to investigate this area to see if they can find anything to shed some light on all of that. We're like, okay, I don't know how these other women have this connection. That was my question, and they don't really explain it. It seems like the way this happens, first off, it seems like it only affects women, which is interesting. And it seems like you have to have some sort of interaction with Titan X for it to even happen, which would imply that these women had some sort of interaction with Titan X at some point in the past. We're probably never going to have that explained. Maybe we don't necessarily need it explained, but still. So then we cut to the next scene where Korra and Kentaro talk, and she walks into his room and is like, "Are you decent?" And then he makes this joke about the word, and he says it depends on your definition of the word. He's not talking about if he's dressed or not. And we find out Kentaro is running off to Thailand. He says he met someone, but he won't say who. Wants to be his own man. And I'm like, there's a girl, isn't it? Spoiler warning, I end up being right, but not in the way you're thinking. And we also find, I guess we're just going to write off the whole thing about him kissing her and then running away after he says, like, "Oh, I bet you like my sister." I guess we're just dropping that. No resolution to that. I'm a little annoyed with that. Come on, writers. You don't just brush something like that off. I need explanations. I'm okay with the two of them getting together, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Korra. And yes, as I've been saying, every time I do this, I'm going to keep calling her Korra. So, I think that was a misstep this season with that, unless they're going to come back to it later. But I have my doubts. And then Korra walks out and she gets accosted by some men in black. And I say, who are they? They don't look like they'd be Apex. Figured they're Monarch. Spoiler warning, I was right. And then we go back to Suzuki and Old Shaw, and there's this interesting line where he says, Shaw basically says this is a miracle, and Suzuki says it's not a miracle, it's physics. Clever. But for some odd reason, even though they name drop Godzilla in that scene, they then just start saying that Titan, and I don't understand why. Why did they switch the names? Were you only allotted by Toho to say the name Godzilla so many times? That would be silly, but whatever. And then we go back to Thailand with Kentaro, and I was like, is he going to meet a woman or an organization? Basically both. And then we find out it's Isabella. And we meet her while she's learning Kung Fu. I mean, boxing. Trying to show us that, that she's a tough girl. Maybe a girl boss. She doesn't come across as a girl boss. I hope she's not a girl boss. Not a fan of girl bosses. And I'm going to leave it at that. Anyway, so they meet up, have a little conversation, building some intrigue. And then we go back to young Shaw, wandering through finding the capsule. Basically, I should mention this. The goal is to get young Shaw. This is where we start getting into some wonkiness. The goal is to get young Shaw to implant a tracker into Titan X in the past while it's sleeping so they can track it in the future. Again, spoiler warning, they succeed at this, but what is mind-boggling is they only start getting that signal at that moment, right when they implant the thing, quote unquote, in the past. So you're telling me, first off, that this didn't cause all that much of a change to the rest of the timeline, even though it looks like it woke up Titan X early, because it does go on a bit of a rampage afterward, even after Youngcha's like, I hope it doesn't wake up, and it wakes up. But what I don't understand is how come no one picked up the signal until that moment. At no other point in the timeline did this thing trigger. I don't get it. I really don't get it. Make it make sense. I'm just saying. All right. That's another, and this always happens when you start doing time displacement or time travel. You run into weird wonky things like this. And unfortunately, this isn't Back to the Future, where everything else in the rest of the story is so good. Whatever wonkiness there might be in the time travel can be forgiven. Yes, this is, again, why you hate time travel. You just get over it, man. Just please, just get over it. Just do your job over there, all right? Yeah, again, I think this is being operated on emotional logic, on drama logic. And unfortunately, it's not quite working this time. I'll save my final assessment of the episode until we get through the rest of my notes. But I did remark that doing all of this with Old Shaw talking to Young Shaw and trying to fix the capsule and all that, it's like I said, it's time displacement IT calls. And that's something I subtly want to do. That sounds like such a great idea with people placing, calls to IT, but it goes through time. So it can be you're calling somebody in the future to help you with something in the present. I might have to make that a story. I don't know why you would have that set up or what you would do with it and all that sort of stuff, but it just sounds kind of interesting. I'll just have to make it interesting and not just stupid. Anyway, and like I said, the Men in Black are Monarch, and I wrote my notes. Tim ain't happy. He chews her out for Cora out for what she's doing, but then we find out, interestingly, Brenda went to bat for Cora and managed to get her off the hook for what happened in Santa Soledad. So I guess the implication here is that Brenda's not all bad, I guess. And then we find out, thanks to Cora, I believe it's Cora, that this whole thing, Titan X is not malevolent. Titan X is not, quote unquote, the villain. Titan X is just trying to migrate, but it got woken up early, and the device that Apex used has thrown it off of its migration, so now it's angry. Basically, they figured out what is, as far as I can tell anyway, what Keiko and Kate are trying to figure out. Or at least, I should say, Cora figured that out. But for some odd reason, no one thought to try to get a hold of them to let them know. So I think we might have another case of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing here. Maybe. I don't know. And then we cut back to Isabella, or Isabel. I don't know which one. I think she said Isabella, but I could be wrong. So we cut back to her and Kentaro, and we get a pretty decent sized retcon lore dump here. So Isabella is adopted by Walter Simmons and his wife, because they thought at that time they couldn't have children. And then they had Maya, the miracle baby, which I guess adds a little bit of tragedy to poor Maya. But begs the question, why didn't we know about Isabella? No mention Isabella. The retcon daughter. I'm not convinced that she won't make it through the season. But that's interesting. So, yeah, she's adopted, even though she looks like she could have been Walter Simmons' daughter, as far as I can tell anyway. And then we go back to some more of the conversation between old and young Shaw, and he starts slowly. Young Shaw starts kind of slowly figuring it out, because old Shaw hasn't told him the truth. He just says he's another colonel and that he's still in the present. He's talking to this guy and trying to tell him, try to help him get back to the surface. But one of the things I kept wondering is, does Old Shaw remember any of this? Or is this entire conversation that he's having an alteration to the timeline? The implication seems to be it's an alteration to the timeline. And yet, even as all of it is going on, Old Shaw doesn't recall any of it. But he does get to a point, we'll talk about it here in a moment, where he's like, I could make it different right now. And also, something happens, and we'll get to it, that he does seem to remember, or at least judging by how he talks. Like I said, this is all like Doctor Who levels of wonky. All right. So, Young Shaw says, you sound like me. Dramatic irony. And yeah, then that's when we start getting into the talk about, can we alter the timeline? Because he's thinking that he could just get his younger self to go find Keiko down there. And I even wrote that, because he does stumble across Keiko from a distance. And I wrote, oh, my retcon. So Keiko says she... Unfortunately, this conversation gets cut off before it can really be developed, because it's just muddying the whole thing here again. Because Kate, while they're walking to the location in Japan where the women were, calls her out. It's like, were you in love with Shaw? And he says she wasn't. But before that could be elaborated upon, because clearly, judging by the conversation that Shaw was having with his younger self, he loved her. Even though he tried to tell, I think that seems to be the implication at the very least, because he even says, like, he tried to tell himself in his own head that it wasn't. So it wasn't one-sided or not. This is so weird. I don't get it. But yeah, they come to the scary gateway with a sign before she can explain, which is just convenient. That whole subplot is just, it's to the point of being frustrating right now. I'm sorry. And then, the Keiko and Kate find some grave markers, some scary looking ones. And I'm like, is that Medusa on that grave marker? And I'm like, why zoom in on the screaming woman's face? I guess to make it seem foreboding, I suppose. And, and at this point, Shaw's wondering if he can actually change some things. And he says Shaw loved her, but she didn't, but she didn't, that's why I'm saying, like, so Shaw was in love with her, but not the other way around. I'm confused about their relationship. And then there is this moment where young Shaw comes across her, and it's incredibly well done. Great acting here from Wyatt Russell. And he tells his younger self, like, this is the moment that you let her go. Which makes me wonder, does he remember this? Is this a new memory? I don't know what's going on here. Or did something like this happen? But without this conversation, again, it's never really explained. Or is he just telling him this? Because I think is this when he figures it out? I think that either right before this I think right before this is when Young Shaw figures out what's going on. He has a bit of a nervous breakdown about it. That's why because at this point, obviously he knows what's going on. Yeah. And then we cut back to Keiko and Kate. We have this interesting line where Keiko says, because Kate's getting ready to go down into a well to go investigating, where, what's going on with these women in tight necks, or what did happen with these women in tight necks in the past. And she says, sometimes what haunts us is what keeps us safe. Because she's afraid for her to go because she's being a grandma at this point. They are afraid for her to go down into the well, which does make sense. But I would say, that might be true. But courage says you overcome that. But it's the very maternal thing to say, whereas the paternal instinct usually would be go overcome that. All right. Then, there's been a few of these conversations. Kentaro's just not sure that what Isabella has to offer is worth it. So he's thinking he's just going to leave again. So they're in a car because she's out in the middle of nowhere. So they're riding his car. It's going to take them 2 hours to get to the airport. And they have this interesting conversation that seems to imply that Isabella is going to use the wibbly-wobbly timey-wiminess of Axis Mundi to keep G-Day from even happening. She's going to alter the past. She wants to retcon basically the inciting incident, at least the present day inciting incident of the entire Monsterverse. That seems to be the implication. And now I'm wondering if she's doing this on her own, because she says that her father gave her that house when she turned 21, but she's not really affiliated with Apex. So she's operating on her own. And I thought, is she with the eco-terrorists? Because this seems like something they would be interested in doing. Use time travel in some form or another to keep the Titans from doing anything. No, that wouldn't make sense because they want the Titans to run rampant. So she's not with the eco-terrorists. That was a stupid idea. I just kind of wish that the eco-terrorists were in this. Maybe they'll be in season 3. Make them the antagonists in season 3, please. You hearing me? Apple TV Plus and Legendary. Follow up on the eco-terrorists, please. I mean, they're in that Kong game that I still haven't played when I should, but I probably should. And then we do finally get some monster action. It's the endopede, the centipede that's the size of a bus, basically, that Young Shaw had mentioned before, and the Ion Dragon. So the Ion Dragon comes back, but it really just amounts to Young Shaw running from the endopede, the Ion Dragon spitting on it, because apparently its spit can not cause paralysis, but trap a creature. And then he just carries it away, presumably to eat it. And that's it. There's your monster. There's your mandatory monster action for the episode. I'm sure some people were disappointed. Yeah, and then he succeeds in getting the tracker into Titan X, and it wakes up, as I mentioned before. Again, I don't know why nobody picked this up. It's a massive, it's a potential plot hole there. I don't understand. Yeah, and then I wrote down that they then lose the signal at the most dramatically convenient point. And I did write in my notes that I'm a little disappointed that Titan X isn't malevolent, especially with how it was being built up in the trailer. I really thought we had a Dagon situation on our hands, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. We still don't know what exactly its motivation is. Because what is it doing? It's migrating, but why is it migrating? Is it migrating for food? Is it migrating to reproduce? There's only a few options here. But I guess we're going to save that for the last couple of episodes. And now, because that signal has gone off, Monarch knows where Titan X is. Cool. Why didn't anybody know this before? Again, it's that whole, now we have that plot hole. And, because if they were picking up the signal before in the earlier parts of the episode of the season, I should say, after this gets implanted, there's no way that they would have, half the season wouldn't have happened. I don't know. Like I said, it's goofy. It's goofy. So there you go. It's the retcons continue in some form or another here. And now we're getting into some time travel. So now there's time travel in the Monsterverse. But the sad thing is the movies will probably not follow up on any of this. They're almost separate entities. I'm starting to feel like, to a certain extent, Monarch Legacy of Monsters is to the Monsterverse what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was to the MCU. Now, it does seem to have more connective tissue than Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had with the MCU, at least after the first season, and is not being treated like the annoying little sister to the whole thing that kind of seemingly gets written out of canon. It's confusing, but that's what makes this one even weird, is that it's not being treated that way, but it seems like most of what happens in this doesn't have all that many consequences for the movies. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see what happens. We only have 3 episodes left. It looks like Godzilla for realsies is going to show up in the next episode. And we still have to see Kong sucker punch tight necks. And I still need to know how all of this is going to happen. So we'll find out. I also do have the titles of the remaining episodes now. They're up on Wikipedia. So it's Separate Ways, not to be confused with my favorite Journey song, Ends of the Earth, and Where We Belong. All right. Thanks a lot. Hey, Jimmy. Not cue the credits, but, cue the bumper. Hello, MIFV Max, and later on, the kaiju lovers. So here I am. It's Saturday morning, the day after the episode has aired, because, well, funny story, in the middle of it, of the latest episode of Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2, which is called Separate Ways. And silly me, I forgot to mention that last week's episode was called String Theory because I'm a goofball like that. I don't need you to agree with me, all right? Jeez, Jimmy. All right. So, mild spoiler warning before we get into the episode, but you've probably already seen it if you're listening to this, and if you haven't, what's wrong with you? Anyway, so Godzilla makes his first proper appearance this season in that episode, and then it cuts to the next scene, and suddenly I'm hearing some of Fukabe Godzilla music, specifically the Godzilla theme in the soundtrack, and I start flipping out. Back it up. It's like, did they really work it in there? And then I didn't hear it again. And then I started thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I am losing my mind. What is wrong with me? I don't understand. I'm hearing things. What is going on? What do you mean you think I hear voices in my head? Okay. I don't care if you would have experience. I'm fine. Okay. Ow. Oh, stupid headaches. Ugh. I don't need to hear about your wife's zillion home remedies for migraines, all right? Jeez. Anyway, I'll be fine. Anyway, as I was saying, I thought I was losing my mind, and I thought, hold on a second. And then I went into the other room where I had left my phone, and lo and behold, my friend Elijah Thomas of the Kaiju Conversation podcast had tried to call me, and I had some Terror of Mechagodzilla music set as his ringtone. That is in fact what I heard. Yeah. So I watched the episode and then returned his call afterward, and it took way longer to finish than I expected. So now here I am, caffeinated and motivated the day after to get you your weekly coverage. So there you go. Let's get into this. So, episode 8. Our director is it's the same director we had last time. I'm not sure if I'm saying this name correctly, but Ganja Montero. And I've been dreading this a little bit. Our screenwriter is Mariko Tamaki. I talked about Miss Tamaki last season because she worked on last season as well. She has become, well, for a minute anyway, she was a controversial figure. She's a screenwriter as well as a comic book writer, among, I think, primarily. And, she rose to infamy, I guess you could say. Her Wikipedia page is very quick to not mention this at all. She's known for stuff like, graphic novels like Skim. What is this one even? What is this even about? It's set in 1993 in a Toronto Catholic Catholic girls' high school. Is about an outsider girl called Skim. Okay. Skim is a not slim 16-year-old Japanese Canadian who is a student. Oh my gosh, it's the exact same thing as what she's notorious for, which is a graphic novel called I Am Not Starfire, and everyone was pointing out that the main character in that is a self-insert for Miss Tamaki, and it looks like this is the same thing. Yeah, she's not popular, to say the least, with a lot of people. And yet here she is. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it's not worth it. And I already talked a bit about her last year. She's been given awards and all of that, but I find it to be a little bit dubious because most of the entertainment industry, regardless of what it is, I find to be, as the kids would say, a bit sus. So I'm amazed that, she's still, I'm still writing for the show, and two, it actually came out as well as it did. So, yeah, I'm kind of betraying my thoughts a little bit there about a couple of things, but yeah, so there you go. So let's just get into this, shall we? Because there isn't all that much new to bring up in regards to that. So, Separate Ways, not to be confused with one of my favorite Journey songs, as I've already joked about. Now, I want to bring something up as I'm looking at the Wikizilla article for this episode, and it under the character appearances, it has Tim, but it doesn't give Tim a last name. I'm like, seriously, have we gone this entire time and he's never been given a last name? I am a little bit confused by this. I keep thinking there's no way. There's no way. Well, you know what? I'm going to check the proper Wikipedia to see. Nope, it still just says Tim. This is so bizarre. So bizarre. I'm wondering if that's being done intentionally because once we know his last name, it's going to be this big revelation. Who knows at this point, but I just thought that was interesting all this time. I don't know if it's just simple oversight or if there's a reason for it. Yeah, sure. You didn't, nobody knew your last name for a hot minute. And to this day, people still want to just call you Mr. from NASA, like our friend Raymond. I'm not saying it isn't silly, but, stage name, on-air moniker, and all that fun stuff. All right. We need to get into this. I've wasted enough time as is. Okay. So, first thing I will say is congratulations, Rex, Elijah's co-host on Kaiju Conversation. Godzilla and Titan X have visited your neck of the woods in, well, specifically northeastern Australia. So shout out to you. Now, what I find interesting is there are no flashbacks in this episode. There's a lot of location hopping, but there are no flashbacks. We mostly spend our time, like when it actually changes the location descriptor, it's northeastern Australia, an undisclosed Monarch location. And what was the other one? Well, we're also in Outpost 18, but I don't know if that was one of the descriptors. Let me see here. The somewhere in the South Pacific, which we only did once, and I have questions about that. I have questions about a lot of things. I'm mildly confused about some stuff here, and I don't know if it's just because I haven't been paying attention or what it is. All right, let's get into this. All right, so northeastern Australia, and we have Titan X beaching herself. Looks suspiciously. When we get to what Titan X has been, what her intentions have been this entire time, I have to say, why is it that I've figured out the obvious and nobody on the show did? But it gets visually foreshadowed here because she looks like a sea turtle that has come ashore to lay eggs. Spoiler warning, that's exactly what she's doing. I mean, if you want to take this naturalistically, which the show has definitely veered into doing, there's only a few major motivations that animals, no matter how large they are, would have for doing stuff like this. And nesting is one of them. And I don't understand why nobody's picked up on that. These are supposed to be incredibly smart people, and no one else figured out that this is what she wanted to do. Okay. Also, we get this is, I think, the first time we've gotten the full body shot, full body look at Titan X, and she reminds me of Biollante, particularly her head design. And I could have swore it looked like she was regenerating in this first scene, like she was regrowing a tentacle. I must have missed something. I'm not sure. And then we cut to the scene where Director Barris, that is his name, I looked it up, is talking with Mr. Secretary. I'm guessing it's probably a UN I don't know if it's a UN secretary. I think there's some dialogue that could kind of imply that, but it's at least somebody high up in the U.S. government, so maybe in the presidential cabinet. I don't know. And they play coy with this, and they don't let you see him immediately. And I'm a little confused on that. I was like, is this someone significant? Because I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And I'm looking, let's see, Director Barris. It's this character is not listed on the Wikizilla as a major appearance. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But they tried to play coy, and they drew a little bit of attention to this guy and made it a bit of a reveal when we see his face. And I wasn't entirely sure why, unless I missed something. I didn't recognize the actor, and I didn't recognize the character from anywhere else in the Monsterverse, at least out of what I've seen, unless he's someone from one of the comics or whatnot. I don't know. That was a little confusing. And during this conversation, they mentioned Castle Bravo, and I wasn't sure. I thought what they were talking about was the base, and they hinted at, dropping some sort of a weapon, and I thought, was they talking about the oxygen destroyer, but that hasn't happened yet. And so that threw me off, and now I'm starting to think, given what I saw in the rest of the episode, that they're in fact referring back to the Castle Bravo nuclear test, which would actually make more sense. And then you have Kate and Keiko who go over and they basically make Monarch aware of Shaw's plan. And now they're like, well, we got to go do something about this. And again, I am wondering, isn't Godzilla supposed to still be an Axis Mundi? That seemed to be what they were going at. Spoiler warning, we find out in this episode that he's not, which then begs the question, why hasn't he been doing his usual shtick in the Monsterverse where he just knows when there are other monsters who are out of line and goes off and deals with it, unless in Godzilla's mind, for some odd reason, Titan X is not out of line with what she's doing, but they're acting like that he thinks that he should know that that something is out of line. So I'm a little bit confused on this. But we'll get to that when Godzilla is properly revealed. And then we have some more conversations with Monarch where Tim and Keiko and Kate are trying to tell Barris, hey, you need to let us go do this. And he's like, no, we need to go kill this thing. And Kate is like, no, it's not trying to hurt us and blah, blah, blah. So there's this big argument going back and forth that basically, without coming out and saying it, gets into the whole thing about how Monarch is not supposed to be a military organization with tons of weapons to fight the kaiju, fight the Titans. They're supposed to be more like environmentalists, naturalists, and they're trying to study and understand the Titans and all that. And Tim mentioned, name drops Godzilla, King of the Monsters, saying like Godzilla is the King of the Monsters. Thanks. And he also name drops Serizawa again. Also, thanks a lot there. And it's mentioned the Titan X is increasing with the same energy as Godzilla. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, unless it's that life-giving radiation that has been mentioned a few times that comes off the Titans. And yeah, that's when I wrote on my notes. I'm pretty sure it's going to reproduce because, again, there's only a few reasons why there would be an increase in some sort of whether it be energy or something else. It's the creature is about to do a function that it normally doesn't do, and it needs extra strength or whatever to do it. And again, so why? Seriously, they're supposed to be brilliant scientist people, and they didn't figure this out. I've been talking with the scientists here on Monster Island, and they figured this out a long time ago. I'm just saying. Once we started stripping away the pseudo-supernatural veneer on Titan X after the first couple of episodes, so Titan X suddenly became less like Dagon, as I've been trying to say for a while, as the trailer was presenting the monster. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to figure out what's actually going on here. But they needed to have this big dramatic reveal, I suppose. But again, we have a ton of smart people acting very dumb. I don't understand it. It's a little strange. Don't lump me together with all of them, sir. As someone who has survived several levels of academia, I know things. I'm just saying. Sure. Throw the I worked at NASA and worked with the most brilliant scientists in the world, whatever. All right, we're gonna move on from this. So I don't know. It's gonna sound like I'm gonna be very harsh on this episode at points. I actually really liked it. I thought it was one of the better episodes of the season, but still, the show is operating on drama logic a little much at points, I think. So I mean. If they had at least suggested that maybe it's trying to reproduce or something, at least toyed with the possibility, instead of just being all mysterious about it, maybe it'd be a little easier to palate. But at the same time, I'm sure the writers probably thought it would take away from the reveal. I don't know. Maybe they should have spent more time trying to make Titan X seem more like some strange supernatural creature or something. I don't know. So anyway, there's that conversation. And then Kentaro's back on Outpost 18, and I'm like, did I miss something? Because this is kind of uneventful, because that's a little bit of a jump, because the last time we saw him, he was on his way to the airport, and now he didn't land anywhere on land. Now he's back on the ship. And there's no fanfare, nothing about it. Like, oh yeah, I got back over here. He's just there. Okay, that was fast. Now, like I said, I'm weirdly nitpicky this week. What do you mean? I'm always nitpicky. Gee whiz, man. All right, and then here's the goofy part. I don't know if this was an accident or if this was intentional, but Korra talks with him. Yes, as I've been saying all season, I'm still going to call her Korra. He just says, oh yeah, I went to Thailand and I met Isabel Simmons, very casually. Now, I don't know. It's either Kentaro is being an idiot and just giving way too much away, or, he doesn't give away like the most important pieces of information, but, still gives it away. So either he's being an idiot, or it's absolutely brilliant and he just says enough information that's not a lie. He just omits key pieces of information. I'm not entirely sure. And then we once again come to Barris and Tim and Kate and Keiko, and they're monitoring the situation with Titan X. And we get this, I think, is actually one of a couple of really good lines that I wrote down. And this one, I thought actually. This one I thought was incredibly clever and is a nice little, I guess you could say, thesis for Monarch in general here, at least, especially as it's been presented here on the show. And it comes from Tim. Monarch has always looked for improbable solutions to impossible problems. Nice work there. And that convinces Barris to not just drop a nuke, essentially, on Titan X, and to let them go and see if they can find another way to deal with the problem. Weirdly, like Toho-esque, that's happened in several Godzilla movies where it's like, no nukes, let us find another solution. And spoiler warning, our characters end up being right. And then, because the whole thing, what's going on here is Kurt Russell, is trying to get Godzilla to come to this beach where Titan X is and fight it. And it's all because it's her fault that Hiroshi is dead. Okay, got it. But again, this is when I wrote down in my notes that I'm confused. Are you telling me he can just come and go to Axis Mundi as much as he wants? He wasn't trapped down there because of the portal? Does he have another way of getting there and back? Kind of like how he apparently can travel to and from the Hollow Earth and all of that. And basically all the things that I mentioned at the beginning here. And then another point in this episode, we had another really good line where I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I believe this one was, I think it was Tim and Korra. Could be wrong on that, but I think it's Tim and Korra. And Tim says, Tim's got all the good lines this week. We're in the monster business, so any mistake is going to be huge. Pretty apt. All right, and then this is something we saw a bit at the beginning of the episode because there's a flock of, I'm guessing they're supposed to be seagulls, is flying around Titan X. And the scarabs are running around doing stuff. But the birds were a new thing. And, I thought it was like, are they feeding off of Titan X? Is there stuff on her back and they're going around and picking it off? So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship sort of a thing. And then, as our characters are flying from Outpost 18 over to the shore in a helicopter, Titan X sees it, and then the birds just fly off in that direction and they crash into the helicopter and basically get it to crash. So what I'm assuming now is that Titan X has some form of telepathy and can command other animals to go do things. Hence why all the mythic stuff that they were looking up, and this is what was presented in the trailer for sure. They say like that other sea life worshipped Titan X, and that. So I'm guessing that's why. It's because there's this telepathic command of other animals, which is an interesting idea. If you're this apex predator and you can just command other animals to go do stuff for you, I mean, including apparently basically dying. That's kind of nuts. That's a lot of power. I would be curious to see how that works because giving telepathy like this to something that isn't sentient, that can be kind of horrifying. And it would also explain why there have been these psychic connections to human women in particular. So I would like to see that get developed a little bit more, but the fact that it's not just spelled out and it's basically left to the audience to kind of figure out, I did appreciate that. Also, by the way, there was a thing earlier, speaking of psychic connections, Keiko said to Kate when they were going in to meet Tim and Barris and all of that, it's like, we won't lead with the fact, that she has a psychic connection to Titan X. So that part they still don't know about. So this is when we switch over to the South Pacific, and this is also when, right after this is when I got the phone call from Elijah that I mentioned at the beginning. But this looks suspiciously, from what I can tell anyway, because we don't get a very clear view of where Godzilla is. It just looks like it's underground, underwater someplace. I'm wondering if it's supposed to be the lair that he had near the ancient ruins in King of the Monsters, because that's what it seems to be. But at this point, Shaw has turned on this device that is supposed to get Godzilla's attention and get him to come here. And so we have this really cool shot. I mean, they were allotting as much of their budget to this episode as they could to make sure they got some nice, even though there's only a few special effects shots, big special effects shots. Well, no, there's a lot of special effects shots here, But, they clearly were making sure they saved as much money for this episode as they could. And this is another case of when Godzilla shows up, you pay attention. He doesn't show up a lot, but when he does, you pay attention. So they're panning over, and it comes to his face, and we see his eye open as if he has something to go do, and something to go take care of. And so I thought that was it was a very effective scene, I thought. Reminded me a little bit of a similar shot in Godzilla -1. So, yeah, apparently he's not an Axis Mundi. He's just been chilling in his lair and shirking his duties. Because this whole thing is that we have to put Titan X back on her migratory path. And again, no one figures out that maybe she's trying to reproduce. I don't know. And that, although if that was the case, you would think you would also freak out because, like, wait, do we want a ton of these running around? Just saying. I don't know. A lot of short-sightedness potentially here. And then we go back to the beach, and it seems as though I'm guessing the helicopter crashed off screen and everyone survived because we don't see any wreckage or anything. We don't see what happened. So I'm a little confused on that. It's a bit of a jump. Sure, if you want to save some money and not actually show it, throw a line or something in there just to explain it. Jeez. Again, I'm getting very nitpicky this week. And then we go to a scene where Korra, or it's split up a little bit, where Korra goes to meet Brenda, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it because basically nothing comes of the conversation other than it's implied that Brenda knows what Isabel's trying to do. And that's basically it. Why Brenda wouldn't want to tell Korra and Monarch what she's trying to do, especially if she is rogue, and there's a potential threat to Apex. You'd think she would say something. I don't know. This might turn into a case of if people would just learn to talk to each other, or would just talk to each other, this would solve a ton of problems. Let that be a lesson for you. I just kind of started to wonder, is it just padding at this point? I don't know. Anyway, so all the stuff with Titan X is going on. It's very clear visually that Titan X is trying to protect something because her tentacle appendages are wrapped around something, or they're trying to shoo away threats. So again, I'm like, she's protecting something. It's probably an egg. That's what I thought. It ends up, quote unquote, being a nest, but yeah. And then now, according to Wikipedia, what Keiko is doing here with this conversation she has with Shaw is a distraction because Kentaro and Kate are going over to Titan X, and Kate is trying to see if she can basically, I guess, communicate in some form or another with Titan X. It was supposed to be a distraction, but it actually seemed to me when I was watching it, maybe I'm missing something because I'm splitting my attention between the show and note-taking, but it seemed to me like she was trying to get through to him and understand his motivations, but maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know. Make of that what you will. But during the conversation where he's like, I'm doing this because I understand the Titans, like, no, you don't. And he's like, tell me one thing you've learned, because he's like, cause he's trying to say, like, Keiko, things aren't the way they used to be, and try to say, like, yeah, you've been gone for 60 years. You don't know how the world is anymore. Which, sure, that's an understandable reason that's some understandable reasoning on his part. So they go back and forth a little bit, and then he's like, oh, crap, what are they doing? And then, he gets in his Jeep, and, well, they both get into the Jeep, and they go down there, and he was trying to tell her, it's like, I wish you were anywhere but here. Let me do my job. I'm the only one who's being put at risk. I'm not putting anybody else at risk, and the reason you're at risk is because you're here, and all that. So a lot of valid points being thrown around. And then we get the big reveal. There's a nest. And what's cool is that the scarabs, they said, had built it, which again lends credence to my telepathy idea where she can command other creatures to do her bidding. It's like Aquaman, except with other things. Yes, I know. I just compared Titan X to Aquaman. Deal with it. So, yeah. So the scarabs, we're getting toward the end of the episode at this point, and this is when Godzilla shows up. And it's a pretty, they do some, some appropriate build up to that with him. They show him swimming underwater a little bit and then breaking the ocean's horizon, in the distance and all of that. And then Titan X gets up and goes into full tilt mama bear mode because she's going to protect her nest, understandably so, and intercepts Godzilla right at the shoreline. And it's a decent fight because Titan X is such a strange design. Again, it reminds me of Biollante, where she's kind of crawling around and hitting him or entangling him with her tentacles and all that, and Godzilla's not exactly sure what to do because there's all these arms coming at him all at once, and but it is also cutting back and forth a little bit, probably to save some budget money. You can't linger too long on the effects, to, like I said, to save a little bit of money. And at this point, what appears to be Apex is shown because Kentaro was talking to Isabel on the phone and seemed to be having doubts about what to do, especially once he found out that Titan X had a nest. And she's, Isabel's like, you need to tell me if we're going to do this or not. And then Trissip shows up. So I'm a little confused on that because it seemed like Trissip was doing stuff for Apex, but now it looks like she's working for Isabel, but Isabel's not with Apex. So is Apex not really involved with this at all? Is it been Isabel, and her little rogue faction this entire time? I'm also starting to reconsider my concept that maybe these are the eco-terrorists from King of the Monsters. Because, yeah, this entire episode, especially the end here, is casting doubts on everything that I thought I knew. So it's a little bit confusing. I don't know why they want the egg. I don't know what this has to do with their so-called plan to keep G-Day from happening, which I thought had to do with using Axis Mundi's wibbly-wobbly timey-wiminess to their advantage. So I really don't know what is going on here. And then we get to this mild spoiler that Michael Hamilton, my former co-host on the Power Trip podcast, he sent me a text message with a mild spoiler about how he said, like, oh, somebody gets hit with Godzilla's atomic ray, and I don't think this happened before. That's not entirely true, Michael. You should know better than that. It's happened before in the Japanese movies. The one that comes to my mind specifically is in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. So, with the business tycoon who was the World War II vet. But I thought, okay, this no-name pilot's probably going to get vaped. It wasn't him, it was Trissip. So Trissip is very dead right now. This is the second unceremonious death of the season. What is with the Monsterverse and unceremonious killing of characters? This keeps happening. It hasn't happened as much, at least in the movies, for a while, but this keeps happening. It's a little bit strange. So anyway, so Isabel's troops or whatever come in with a helicopter. They tie a hoist or whatever to the nest and they fly it away. Titan X sees it as they fly out across the ocean and then starts chasing after it with Godzilla in hot pursuit. And that's how the episode ends. It's a good ending. But I'm also sitting here wondering, is Godzilla going to figure something out? Is he going to be like, oh, you just went your nest, I'll leave you alone? And also, why does he feel the need to chase after Titan X? So it's this one's getting a little strange. I'm curious to see what the next episode will do. Yeah, the next episode, by the way, is called Ends of the Earth. Judging by what I saw in the description for it on Apple TV Plus, it looks like they're going to Skull Island. So maybe next week is when we get the shot from the trailer of Kong sucker punching Titan X. My guess would be that because I don't think Godzilla is going to meet Kong in this, because that would be contradictory to what we see in the movies. And as fast and loose as the show has played with what the movies have established, I don't think they're quite as willing to just flat out break stuff, even though they kind of sort of have. But I think what will happen is either Godzilla's gonna be like, I'm not going to Skull Island, and just leaves, or he decides that Titan X isn't a problem that he needs to deal with. So he will cease his pursuit, and Titan X will get lured by Isabel's group to Skull Island, and then Kong is going to be like, what you doing in my house? And then goes nuts. So that'd be my guess. And I would also suspect, unless we're going to spend the last 2 episodes on Skull Island, which would be interesting, I suspect that we'll get Kong next week, and then the finale will, as much as I would like to see Godzilla and or Kong in the last episode, kind of like how in season 1 they had Godzilla show up at the end, of the finale, my guess would be that the last episode will just be our characters trying to deal with Isabel's group when she tries to implement her plan and stuff like that, and with Titan X, and we'll get a big revelation about all of that, so that's my prediction. We've got 2 episodes left, 2 more weeks, and we'll see how that goes. Good point, Jimmy. I considering that I will be canceling the Apple TV Plus when this is done, we should probably get to that weirdo Tetris movie at the very least, so that I'm not just throwing money at Apple TV Plus to watch Monarch, even though I'm doing my best to mine content out of it, as we all are. All right, so thank you once again for joining us for this. If you're MIFV Max, I'll see you next week with the penultimate episode of season 2. And if you're listening to this after the fact, you'll either have to wait until the next volume of discussions, or about 10 seconds or so after this bumper, and we'll continue our journey through Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, season 2. Hello, MIFV Max, and later on, the kaiju lovers, and welcome to Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, Season 2, Episode 9, Ends of the Earth, or as I like to call it, welcome to Retcon City. Yes, Jimmy, I know I've said that before, but I'm calling it Retcon City, or maybe Retcon Central, I don't know, whichever you prefer, because seriously, what is going on? This show just continues with these retcons, and there are a lot of them that are now connected to Kong Skull Island, and we need to get into that. So, what's going on this week? So we have Ends of the Earth, directed by Lawrence Tilling. Is that? Yeah, directed by Lawrence Tilling, who we have talked about before, and our screenwriter is Tanner Hansinger. I'm going to see what I can find about Hansinger. Should have looked that up a little bit beforehand. There's no Wikipedia page for him, so let's check Dr. Google, see what he has to say. Check his IMDb. What do we have here? A lot of nothing. It just lists Monarch and Severance and Lost in Space as his past work, and also thank you for your service, but that's additional crew. Let's see. Where else has he worked as this is writer's assistant? Okay. And I see writing, production assistant, Lost in Space. Oh, no, this is his only actual proper writing credit. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Well, I don't know how to feel about that, but like I said, we need to get into this. So, this takes place largely on Skull Island, so it looks like, and from what I can see of the little preview for next week, it's going to end, we're still going to be on Skull Island. So the show, it has come the season, I should say, has come full circle. It is ending where it started. Is anyone surprised? Not really. I mean, it's not a bad idea. Cycles are nice in that regard. Circles. Kind of like how Titan X has been on has gone on a migration and has to come back to Skull Island. Speaking of which, that's what our first scenes are about this, because the show can be bothered to respect continuity and not have Kong and Godzilla meet, thankfully, because they're not supposed to until Godzilla versus Kong. So, and I also noted that the score, at least at the beginning, sounded eerily similar to what we got from Junkie XL in GVK GXK. Maybe that was intentional. I don't know. And at this point, it's dark, and Titan, and they mentioned that they're going to Skull Island. Titan, because trying to chase the egg, and we find that that's because that's where Isabella and her faction, I guess we could say, are, that's where they took it, because it's now firmly established that Apex doesn't know what the heck is going on here, reminding us that, yes, in fact, she's no longer with Apex, Isabella. Thank you. But it also continues to show that it's a bit of a missed opportunity to not have the eco-terrorists. There are some who theorize that, I've seen, particularly in the Omni viewers comment section, although he's hinted at this too, that maybe they're not doing that because the Hollywood types don't view eco-terrorists as bad guys. Maybe, but given what was going on in this, the eco-terrorist wouldn't be a good fit anyway, because we find out later that Isabella hates the Titans. She tells Kentaro, don't feel sympathy for Titan X, because it didn't feel sympathy for your dad, and it doesn't feel sympathy for any of us. So the eco-terrorist would not be interested in whatever it is that Isabella is doing. However, I do think they should be in the next one. In season 3, I've been told that they're in that Kong game that came out a little while ago. I should probably pick that up and play it at some point. Anyway, Godzilla simply, after having a roar exchange with Titan X, just decides to leave. That's it. And there's a little bit of talk. It's like, oh, is he scared of Kong? And Godzilla's not scared of anybody. And then Keiko just says, well, his role is to bring balance, right? Maybe he's just redirecting Titan X to where she needs to be, which is kind of what I figured last week. So I was right. That's it. He's just making sure she's supposed to be where she's supposed to be. That's why he was chasing her for a bit, because I was like, what? He's weirdly aggressive, so I don't know what he's doing, but I can't imagine that he want to actually kill Titan X. And, Shaw's just like, oh, well, there goes my plan. Thanks, buddy. That sort of a thing. It's like, really? If you think Godzilla was going to listen to you? He's, you're dreaming, buddy. All right. So let's see. They do wonder, who else this could be during that scene. Let's see. I think I covered basically all of that. All right. So after our intro, we now have our characters making an expedition to Skull Island. I'm not sure if they filmed this in Vietnam. If they did, if they didn't, I should say, they found some pretty good locations that look enough like what we saw of Skull Island in the, in the Kong Skull Island movie. I think I've brought that up before, but we spent a lot more time here in the daylight this time around. And boy, there will be a lot of callbacks to that movie, which I guess kind of makes sense, because even though it's set in 1972, it was released in 2017, and the show's now set in 2017. So Kate mentions that someone that she knew said everything on this island is trying to kill you. I thought that was a nice callback. Pretty sure that's from Kong Skull Island. And then there also went during this exchange, when everybody's getting situated, getting onto the island from Monarch, and Tim refers to Titanex as an it, and Cora makes a big deal about using feminine pronouns with Titanex. Now, I will admit I've switched between the two of them and then kind of got into the habit of using feminine pronouns for Titanex. I just don't understand why it has to get called out here. It's a good point, Jimmy. It might be politically motivated. I hope it isn't, but it would be a little bit silly here. At least it wasn't like that notorious scene that got a ton of attention and memed to death from Star Wars The Acolyte. I know you would rather not talk about that. Okay. Anyway, we're moving on. Then we get the first of a handful of flashbacks to several different years. This is 1958. It's October 12th. This was triggered by Keiko finding some notes from Billy. And they're in Papua New Guinea. I'm like, oh, Barogon is from there, and I have friends there doing work with doing some missionary work over there. Wycliffe Bible translators. Shout out to the Klauses. I hope you're having a good time. And we find out that Keiko and Billy eloped. They went and found basically a local justice of the peace, and got married. And Billy can't focus. He keeps getting distracted by all of the science stuff that's going through his head. And then, they have some, a prepared speech, if you want to call it a vow, and vows, I should say. And Keiko has a nice one here where she says, "I promise to always believe in you and your crazy ideas." Wish I could find myself a girl like that. No, Jimmy, I don't care if your wife has a friend she could introduce me to. We're not talking about that. All right. Putting those rumors down. All right. By the way, before we continue, I should mention that this is being recorded a few days after the fact because it has, as you all know, on the, I'm saying as you all know, that's, major writing faux pas. But anyway, it's been, for one, I have been very busy this weekend. I had some company over, recorded an impromptu episode, and there was an incident earlier today involving our local Ultraman and a notorious monster who was once fought by Ultraman Nexus, and I will leave it at that. So, let's see. And then, the Justice of the Peace makes a joke about, it's Dr. Wife, which I thought was funny, because Billy reminded him, it's like, hey, Keiko's a doctor, so you're going to call her that. And I did write my notes, like, don't they need witnesses in order for this to be official? I guess not. Anyway, maybe not in Papua New Guinea. I don't know. I don't know how weddings work in Papua New Guinea. All right, so we cut back and we get a little bit more talk about about what Isabel wants to do, because Kate's like, why are you doing this? Kentaro, why are you helping her? Calling him out. And she brings up how they can explore, if they can open a portal to Access Mundi, they can exploit its time displacement features. You could go down into Access Mundi if you have a disease, stay there for a short time, come back, and they've developed a cure for whatever it is. I mean, there's a logic to it. That's an interesting idea. Surprised I hadn't thought of that. Doesn't explain how she thinks she can use it to go backwards in time, unless the whole idea is that this is stupid and she doesn't know what she's doing. So this whole expedition, this whole plan is foolhardy. You still got to deal with it, but it's foolhardy. I don't know. I did write in my notes, as the other Monarch characters are wandering around the island, Cora, again, I'm going to keep calling her Cora. She keeps trying to be snarky, typical millennial. I know I'm indicting myself on that. Don't hit the button, Jimmy. I know you were going for it. And she thinks she's funny. I'm finding her a little annoying, to be honest. She has been a little bit more annoying than normal, in this episode. And then we get to one of the first big monster appearances, I guess you could say, in this. And, I just wrote my notes. The trees are alive and they eat the red shirts. Of course. So what I actually found out is these are the vine stranglers. Thank you, Wikizilla, for that. And what's interesting about the vine stranglers, because I was trying to, I didn't remember them from the Skull Island movie, and I was trying to figure out where they came from. They originally appeared, weirdly enough, in a tabletop RPG source book from 2023 called Kong Skull Island Cinematic Adventure. It's basically a reskin of D20, what is it, D20 5th edition? Let's see. Yeah, D20 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's originally in that. It's been in the Birth of Kong comic, and it's in here, but according to this, it was redesigned. But because it's more insectoid in its previous appearances. This one, it's a more humanoid, but it's still pretty horrifying because the characters step over branches and it's their tendrils, and they were disguised as the branches, and then they grab people, drag them away, and eat them, because that's what everything on Skull Island does. To my surprise, no, they never run into any skull crawlers. I've noticed that on this show. There are no skull crawlers being encountered. I guess Kong has really been able to keep them under control in the years since since 1972. I keep tripping myself up because I want to say Skull Island, but that could be confused with the awful Netflix show, and I'd rather not do that. The Netflix show does not exist. Yes, Jimmy, I'm PTSDing about it like you used to. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. I did wonder at this point, it's like, are we going to get Kong this week or next? Spoiler warning, he shows up during this. Not for very long, but he shows up in this. And, we cut back to Kentaro, and I'm thinking Kentaro's acting remarkably cold in this episode in particular, and kind of in the last episode, and I'm not exactly sure. Maybe the idea is that he's mourning his dad. Maybe it's his way of hiding, that he's not so sure about what's going on from his sister. But it's a bit of a character change for him. It's a little strange. And then we have this scene where Isabel is like, look at this. This is our Cape Canaveral, which made Jimmy happy. I know you used to work there. And she talks about some of your heroes. I get it. Anyway, that's interesting because she keeps using the space analogies here because Kentaro asks, why am I here? And she says, well, do you know why Neil Armstrong was picked to walk on the moon? Because he was the best pilot. So they were all the best pilot. It's because he was the right guy. And that's it. No explanation for why he was the right guy. Basically telling him, you're the right guy to be here. Again, no explanation why. That is not, that confused me. Why is he the right guy? That is the immediate question you have to ask. So, sorry, show, you kind of failed there with me. That doesn't work. Let's see. I still don't understand what Isabel's doing, what Isabel's plan is. I mean, does she think she can reverse the time displacement effects? I don't understand. Especially with the drama logic emotional cliffhanger we get at the end of this, the very abrupt one. All right, but the other thing, and this is what upsets Kentaro, even though he pretends later on that it doesn't bother him. It says, we need Titan X to open the rift and kill Kong because he's not going to like us being here. Because one thing that Monsterverse Kong doesn't like is when people keep breaking into his house. That happens a lot. He's a little sick of it. And, that seems like it's the bridge too far for Kentaro because he starts protesting that. And Isabel's like, well, I'm sorry. She does apologize, which is interesting, because here's my sexist comment for the day. Women don't like to apologize. Well, I'm glad you found that out the hard way. Has Kaguya learned that she can't just get away with not apologizing? Oh, okay. Of course she did because, better than all the Earth ladies, I guess. But anyway, if only some, not all of us can be that lucky. Just saying. All right. Yeah. How's she doing as the ambassador to Planet X? I know you miss her. Anyway, so we cut to 1959, and this flashback felt a little pointless. We have young Shaw and Billy, and it's right after Keiko had been lost, and it doesn't really tell me anything other than confirm that they were emotionally distraught after it happened. Why is this here? Was it in their contract to get Wyatt Russell in at least one more episode? I guess. I don't know. And then Isabel's group finds the tracker, which complicates things because I think I forgot to mention at this point, because they have something here that we have on the island because they're using an abandoned Monarch facility. No explanation for why it's there. I guess after 1972, they just built it on there. I think I read something about that happening at some point. And obviously in the movies, we see stuff like that. Because they have knockout gas that tranquilizes Titan X. Just like we do here on the island. I'm sure that was supplied to Monarch by the people here on the island. Or the other way around. All right, fine. I guess we're not that cool. Anyway, so then they find the track and that complicates things. And then, we have a nice callback because one of the surviving soldiers says to Kara, it's like, okay, which way is up? Because she was telling him, it was like, hey, I've been here before. It's such a scary place with everything trying to kill you that you won't be able to focus and know which way is up. That's what we're going to use my tracker, even though they can see physical signs of where Titan X is going. Again, Kara's a little annoying this episode. And then we get to what is the biggest callback to the Kong Skull Island movie. Old Shaw and Keiko find the boneyard. Yep, that boneyard. And they start walking around, exploring it a little bit. It's remarkably unchanged. The bones are all still there. They're not decomposing that quickly, I guess. And here's where we get into a little bit of drama logic, because at this point, it's been 45 years. Is it 45? Yeah, 45 years since 1972, give or take. And they find bullet casings that are still laying there. I would have thought that they would have been moved by animals, more bones, more titans, the weather, something. They're all there. And then Keiko finds Billy's camera that was only buried in a few inches of dirt. I'm a little astonished after 45 years. That's all that happened. She did recognize the camera. Basically, this was a bunch of drama logic. And this was the moment where Keiko, I think pretty sure she already knew that Billy was dead. But now she's confronted with it, because she realizes this is where he died. So I guess that's where the emotion comes from. So there you go. But, still a little bit of drama logic there. It's not that bad a drama logic here, though. And then we have another flashback, 1968. And Billy's giving a lecture in Pennsylvania. And he mentions monsters and rifts, and the students are a little bit confused. And then Suzuki shows up. And the note I wrote in here is that they've taken this actor, and now, because this is only 4 years before Kong Skull Island, and they gave him a beard, more hair. They're trying to make him look older, but I'm still having a hard time believing that he's going to turn into John Goodman in just 4 years, unless he just really lets himself go. And all this scene really accomplishes is it tells us that he got too obsessed to focus on Hiroshi. because that's what Suzuki does. He tells him to go home to see his son. And he says, I can't, because he's trying to find, and then we find out later it's because he's obsessed with finding Keiko. Okay. Again, not really giving us all that much new information, especially since the post-wedding flashbacks were set up by old Shaw, saying to Keiko that everything changed after she disappeared. And so far, it hasn't really showed us anything all that different that we didn't already know. It's just trying to find cool ways to do it, I suppose. And then they start walking around. They're looking for these probes, and the probes look like the oxygen destroyer, the old school oxygen destroyer. I don't know if that was intentional or not. And they're all marked differently. At first, I thought what they were trying to retcon was that Bill Randa brought all these probes with him during the Kong Skull Island movie. And they didn't say that, but what it is he went to different locations and threw them through rifts to, basically see where they would go. Well, no, we found it's actually because he's trying to send them to Keiko, but, he sends them through, and because we find out that Skull Island is apparently the Grand Central Station for this Titan network and these portals, because that's where they're all coming out in this same spot. And one of them is, I think all of them, he wrote the same thing, which is the vows he wanted to say at the beginning of the episode. Keiko starts, pulls it out, starts reading it, and it's run parallel with the previous scenes, and you hear him reading them. It's a very well-made scene, but again, it's nicely sentimental. And then she concludes that he spent all this time trying to find her, and the implication seems to be that even in Kong Skull Island, even though he clearly says that that's not what he's doing in the movie, but that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to find her. And that doesn't entirely make sense to me. Not sure what to do with that. But, drama logic, what can I say? And then we cut back and we find out that the goal, this wasn't when we find it out, but it's when it's implemented. But Isabel's group, their goal is to put that Titan device, that kind of control device that Korra helped develop for Apex. They're going to use it to amplify Titan X's aggression to get it, to get her to fight Kong, because they don't want to deal with Kong. And they implement that here at the end. And also, I should mention, Kong was running around this entire time. Their distraction for him was playing a monster roar off of speakers on a helicopter. So that's what he's been doing. He's been chasing get to the chopper. He's been doing that this entire time. You knew that had to happen. I make no apologies. Not even to you, Jimmy. All right. So then we come to the cliffhanger where Kate confronts Kentaro again. And for the first time in most of the episode, he actually shows some emotion and says that what he's doing, they can use it to save Dad. And then the episode just abruptly ends. That's it. As cliffhangers go, even emotional cliffhangers, that was not one of the good ones. It was too abrupt. And it doesn't even feel all that shocking, given the fact that we've already been told that it can be used, for time displacement. That seems like something that you would try to use it for. I guess the shocker is that it's Kentaro basically saying why he's doing any of this, and that's where the surprise is supposed to be. I don't know. I was just underwhelmed by this cliffhanger. Good point, Jimmy. We'll see what happens next week. Will you stop ranting about how much you hate time travel? We don't need to hear it. Calm the F down. Ugh. Anyway. There's so that's the episode. Next week we have episode 10, Where We Belong. I also do want to mention, this is my last note for the episode. I think I had seen this before, but now it was, I saw it again and now I can't deny it. But Mariko Tamaki, the notorious Mariko Tamaki that I talked about last week, is the senior story editor on the show. I think that might explain a few things, and I will leave it at that. See you next week.